Subscribe to Cheating Tales Lab and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. We hope you enjoy this story. Let's begin. Robert Riley's key turned in the lock, the soft click echoing through the silent foyer of his lavish mansion. The 45-year-old executive's brow furrowed as he stepped inside, the absence of his wife Letitia immediately apparent. "Letitia," he called out, his voice bouncing off the high ceilings. No response. He dropped his suitcase by the door, his eyes scanning the immaculate living room. Something was off. A tie knotted was draped carelessly over the back of an armchair. He picked it up, bringing it to his nose. An unfamiliar cologne clung to the silk, musky and expensive. Robert's jaw clenched as he made his way through the house, noting small inconsistencies. A wine glass with a lipstick stain in the sink, a throw pillow out of place on the couch. Each detail added to the growing knot in his stomach. In the bedroom, he unpacked methodically, his mind racing. He pulled out his phone, dialing Letitia's number. Straight to voicemail. He tried again, and again. Nothing. With a growl of frustration, Robert began calling Letitia's friends. Each conversation left him more unsettled than the last. "Oh, Robert." Letitia mentioned something about a spa retreat. Sarah, her yoga buddy, said with a nervous laugh. 10 minutes later, Jennifer, another friend, told him, "I think she said something about visiting a sick aunt. I'm not sure of the details." Their hesitation, the conflicting stories, it all reeked of deception. Robert's knuckles turned white as he gripped the phone, forcing his voice to remain calm as he thanked them and ended the calls. A methodical search of the house turned up nothing until he reached Letitia's vanity. Tucked away in a drawer, beneath a tangle of silk scarves, he found a receipt. His eyes narrowed as he read the itemized list: an outrageously expensive lingerie set, purchased on a date that coincided perfectly with his last business trip. The doorbell chimed, interrupting his dark thoughts. Robert composed himself before answering, finding Mrs. Rosalie Dawson, their 65-year-old neighbor, on the porch. "Mr. Riley, I'm so glad you're back," she said, wringing her hands. "I hope I'm not overstepping, but I thought you should know. There's been an unfamiliar black SUV parked outside your house several times this week, always when you're away." Robert's blood ran cold, but he managed a tight smile. "Thank you for letting me know, Mrs. Dawson. I'm sure it's nothing to worry about." As soon as he closed the door, Robert's calm facade crumbled. He stormed through the house, tearing through drawers and closets. In Letitia's study, hidden behind a row of untouched classics, he found a sleek, expensive burner phone. The device was password protected, a final barrier between Robert and the truth he already knew in his gut. He stared at his reflection in the dark screen, barely recognizing the hard-eyed stranger staring back at him. Robert's fingers flew across his phone's keypad, muscle memory dialing a number he rarely used but always kept close. "Tim, it's Robert. I need your help." No questions asked. Within an hour, Tim Stafford arrived, looking every bit the socially awkward IT genius he was. His arms were laden with equipment that looked like it belonged in a spy movie rather than a suburban home. "What's the situation, boss?" Tim asked, already setting up his laptop on the kitchen island. Robert's explanation was terse, stripped of emotion. He laid out the facts, the mysterious absences, the conflicting stories, the burner phone. Tim listened intently, nodding occasionally as his fingers flew over the keyboard. "We're going to turn this place into a digital fortress," Tim declared. "Every room, every angle. Nothing will escape our notice." They worked through the night, installing cutting-edge surveillance equipment throughout the house. Cameras in the bedroom, living areas, and all entry points. Microphones hidden in strategic locations. By dawn, Robert had access to a command center that would make intelligence agencies envious. As Tim packed up his gear, Robert clapped him on the shoulder. "I owe you one, Tim." The smaller man shook his head. "You gave me a chance when no one else would. We're even." He hesitated at the door. "Robert, whatever you find, be careful, okay?" Robert's smile was cold. Always am, Tim. Always am. Alone again, Robert set his plan in motion. He crafted a convincing story about an emergency business meeting in Tokyo, complete with hastily booked flights and a hotel reservation. When he texted Letitia the news, her response was almost instantaneous, a flurry of concerned emojis and promises to hold down the fort. When Letitia returned home, Robert watched her on the newly installed cameras. He noted the fleeting look of relief that crossed her face at the mention of his impending trip. It vanished quickly, replaced by a well-practiced expression of wifely concern. As Robert pretended to pack, he caught Letitia slipping into the garden, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was too low to make out the words, but her body language spoke volumes. Furtive glances, nervous gestures. When she noticed him watching from the window, she ended the call abruptly, plastering on a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Robert kissed her goodbye, the act of tenderness feeling like ash in his mouth. He drove to the airport, parked his car in long-term parking, and took a cab to a nondescript hotel on the outskirts of town. The room was bland, forgettable. Perfect. He set up his laptop, linking to the surveillance feed. And then, Robert Riley settled in to watch his marriage implode. The hotel room clock read 9:47 p.m. when headlights swept across the front of the house on Robert's laptop screen. He leaned forward, every muscle in his body coiled tight as a spring. A sleek black SUV matching Mrs. Dawson's description perfectly pulled into the driveway. The driver's door opened, and Robert's world crumbled. Santiago Lutz stepped out, his confident stride unmistakable even in the grainy footage. Robert's longtime business rival, the man who'd tried to undercut him at every turn for over a decade. But Santiago wasn't alone. Two more figures emerged from the vehicle: Andre Ackerman and Herbert Stark. Robert recognized them instantly as Santiago's most trusted associates. All three men cut imposing figures, their expensive suits doing little to hide their athletic builds. Robert's hands clenched into fists, knuckles white with rage. This wasn't just an affair. This was a calculated attack on everything he held dear. The front door opened before they could knock. Letitia stood framed in the doorway, a vision in red lace that made Robert's stomach churn. It was the lingerie set from the receipt, he realized with a sickening lurch. She bought it for them. For this debauchery. He watched, bile rising in his throat, as his wife welcomed the three men with the enthusiasm of a long-lost lover. No, not lover. Lovers. Plural. What unfolded over the next few hours seared itself into Robert's brain. The sounds of ecstasy, the tangle of limbs, the utter betrayal of every vow they'd ever made. He forced himself to keep watching, to document every sordid detail. This wasn't just about gathering evidence anymore. This was about burning away any lingering shred of affection or trust. As the night wore on, Robert's initial shock gave way to a cold, calculating anger. He listened as they made plans for future rendezvous, always carefully timed to coincide with his business trips. This wasn't a one-time indiscretion. This was a well-oiled machine, a conspiracy designed to cuckold him in his own home. Next Friday works perfectly, Letitia purred, running her fingers through Santiago's hair. Robert has that conference in Chicago. Santiago chuckled, a sound that set Robert's teeth on edge. Excellent. I'll bring the champagne. You supply the entertainment. By the time dawn broke, Robert Riley was a changed man. The successful but ultimately trusting husband was dead, replaced by something harder, colder, a man with nothing left to lose and everything to gain through merciless retribution. He checked out of the hotel, his movements precise and controlled. To anyone watching, he was just another businessman starting his day. They couldn't see the storm raging behind his eyes, the wheels of vengeance already turning in his mind. As he drove home, Robert's mind raced with possibilities. Santiago, Letitia, Andre, Herbert, they had no idea what was coming. But Robert did, and he would make sure that when he was done, they would wish they had never crossed Robert Riley. Robert Riley's fingers drummed a steady rhythm on his mahogany desk. his eyes fixed on the business card before him. Faith Montgomery, private investigator. He'd vetted her thoroughly, discreet, sharp, and with a reputation for getting results no matter the cost. Perfect. He dialed a number, his voice clipped and professional when she answered. Ms. Montgomery? Robert Riley. I have a job for you. It's delicate, it's complex, and it needs to be handled with the utmost discretion. Faith's response was equally businesslike. I understand, Mr. Riley. Perhaps we should meet in person to discuss the details. An hour later, they sat in a nondescript cafe, well away from Robert's usual haunts. Faith was younger than he'd expected, barely 35, but her eyes held a hardness that spoke of experience beyond her years. Robert laid out the situation, his words precise and emotionless. He watched Faith's expression carefully, noting the slight widening of her eyes when he mentioned Santiago Lutz. Santiago Lutz, Faith mused, tapping her pen against her notepad. He's got a reputation in certain circles. Not all of it good. Robert leaned forward, his voice low and intense. I want everything, Miss Montgomery. Every skeleton in his closet, every dirty deal, every indiscretion. Leave no stone unturned. Faith nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Consider it done, Mr. Riley. I'll be in touch. Over the next few weeks, Robert threw himself into his work with a fervor that surprised even his most ambitious colleagues. To the outside world, he was a man on a mission to grow his empire. In reality, every move was calculated to bring Santiago's world crashing down around him. Faith's reports came in regularly, each one adding another piece to the puzzle. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, shell companies with suspiciously similar board members, a pattern of bribes and kickbacks that stretched back years. Robert pored over the information, meticulously connecting the dots. He worked late into the night, fueled by a combination of expensive scotch and cold fury. The Robert of a month ago would have balked at the idea of destroying a man's life and career. That Robert was dead, replaced by a creature of pure, ruthless ambition. Using an anonymous email account, Robert crafted a masterpiece of innuendo and partially revealed truths. Just enough to pique the interest of the SEC, not enough to show his full hand. He hit send with a smile, imagining the storm that was about to break over Santiago's head. In the office, Robert was the picture of professionalism. He outbid Santiago on a crucial contract with a smile and a handshake, all while imagining the look on his rival's face when it all came crashing down. Tough luck, Santiago, Robert said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Maybe next time, eh? Santiago's grip was too tight as they shook hands. Always a pleasure doing business with you, Robert. Give my best to Letitia, won't you? It took every ounce of Robert's self-control not to punch the smug bastard right there in the boardroom. The final piece of his plan fell into place at a charity gala. Robert had done his homework. He knew exactly which causes Gabriella Lutz, Santiago's wife, was passionate about. It was child's play to engineer a chance meeting by the champagne fountain. Gabriella was everything her husband wasn't: warm, genuine, with a quick wit that Robert found himself genuinely enjoying. He pushed away the pang of guilt that threatened to surface. This wasn't about Gabriella. She was collateral damage in a war she didn't even know was being fought. It's so refreshing to meet someone who actually cares about these causes, Gabriella said, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. Sometimes I think half the people here are just for the free champagne and photo ops. Robert laughed, the sound almost foreign to his ears after weeks of determination. Well, I won't say no to good champagne, but you're right. There are more important things in life than the bottom line. As they parted ways, Robert couldn't help but notice the way Gabriella's eyes lingered on him. He filed the information away, another potential weapon in his arsenal. The SEC audit hit Santiago's company like a thunderbolt from a clear sky. Robert watched from the sidelines, his face a mask of polite concern as the business world buzzed with speculation. Santiago's usual swagger was noticeably absent at the next industry event. His collar seemed too tight, his smile strained as he glad-handed his way through the crowd. Robert approached, armed with a flute of champagne and faux sympathy. "Rough time, Santiago?" he asked, his voice low enough that only they could hear. "These audits can be such a headache. If there's anything I can do to help." Santiago's eyes flashed with a mixture of suspicion and barely contained rage. "I don't need your help, Riley. This is nothing but a minor inconvenience. Will be cleared in no time." Robert raised his glass in a mock toast. "Of course." I never doubted it for a moment. As he turned away, Robert allowed himself a small, cold smile. The noose was tightening, and Santiago could feel it. At home, Letitia was becoming increasingly agitated. Robert caught her scrutinizing their bank statements, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Darling," she said one evening, her voice carefully neutral, "I've noticed some irregularities in our accounts. Is everything all right with the business?" Robert put on a show of concern, internally marveling at her audacity. The woman who had been bleeding their accounts dry for months now had the nerve to question him. "Oh, what kind of irregularities?" he asked, moving to look over her shoulder at the statement. Letitia pointed to several large transfers. "They're substantial." Robert furrowed his brow, the picture of a concerned husband. You're right, that is odd. I'll have to speak with our accountant. Thank you for bringing this to my attention, dear. I don't know what I'd do without you watching out for us." The kiss he placed on her cheek felt like acid on his lips. As the weeks wore on, Robert noticed a change in Letitia's behavior. Her phone calls became more frantic, always taken in hushed tones behind closed doors. He didn't need to check the surveillance footage to know that her rendezvous with Santiago and his cronies had all but ceased. One particularly tense evening, Robert accidentally overheard a snippet of conversation as he passed by Letitia's study. "What do you mean you can't make it?" she hissed into the phone. "Andre, you promised. No, you don't understand. Robert's been asking questions about the accounts. I think he suspects something." Robert allowed himself a smile as he continued down the hallway. The rats were starting to abandon the sinking ship. His friendship with Gabriella was progressing nicely. They met for coffee under the guise of discussing charity work. But Robert could see the growing doubt in her eyes when she spoke of Santiago. "He's been so distant lately," Gabriella confided during one such meeting. "Always working late, barely speaking to me when he is home. I can't help but feel like he's hiding something." Robert reached out, placing a comforting hand over hers. "I'm sure it's just the stress of the audit. But Gabriella, if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here." The grateful smile she gave him almost made him feel guilty. Almost. The final nail in Santiago's coffin came in the form of a carefully curated photo leak. Robert had agonized over this move, knowing it would hurt Gabriella as much as Santiago. But in the end, his thirst for revenge won out. The photos hit the tabloids like a bomb. Santiago Lutz, respected businessman, caught in compromising positions with not one, but several women. None of them his wife, and notably, none of them Letitia. Robert had been careful about that he wasn't ready to show his full hand just yet. The business world exploded with scandal. Santiago's already shaky reputation crumbled. And in their lavish home, Gabriella Lutz stared at the headlines with tears in her eyes, reaching for her phone to call the one person she thought she could trust. Robert bided his time, watching as Letitia grew more frantic with each passing day. Her lovers had abandoned her. Her spending habits were under scrutiny, and her carefully constructed world of lies was crumbling around her. He chose his moment carefully. Letitia had just ended yet another tense phone call, her face pale and drawn as she paced the living room. Robert stepped in, closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the tense silence. "Rough day, dear?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. Letitia whirled to face him, her eyes wide with poorly concealed panic. "Robert, I didn't hear you come in. It's nothing. Just some drama with the girls from the club." Robert nodded slowly, moving to pour himself a drink. The clink of ice against glass was the only sound for a long moment. Funny, he said finally. I could have sworn I heard Santiago's name mentioned. And Andres. Correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't those Santiago Lutz's associates? Odd company for your club friends to keep, wouldn't you say? The color drained from Letitia's face. I don't know what you're talking about. You must have misheard. Robert took a slow sip of his scotch, savoring the burn as much as the fear growing in Letitia's eyes. Oh, I don't think I did. In fact, I think I've been hearing things quite clearly for some time now. The question is, Letitia, how long did you think you could keep this charade going? Letitia's demeanor changed in an instant, fear replaced by defensive anger. What are you implying, Robert? I've been nothing but faithful to you. A harsh laugh escaped Robert's lips. Faithful? Is that what you call fucking my business rival and his associates in our bed? Is that what you call draining our accounts to fund your little escapades? He pulled out his phone, queuing up the damning footage from that first night of surveillance. Letitia's face crumpled as she watched herself writhing in ecstasy, Santiago and his friends taking turns with her like she was nothing more than a toy to be passed around. How did you? She stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Robert's voice was ice cold. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Did you think I was too stupid, too trusting, to see what was happening right under my nose? Letitia's shock quickly turned to anger. She drew herself up, eyes flashing. You were never here, always working, always on some business trip. What did you expect me to do? Sit at home like a good little wife? I expected you to honor our vows. Robert spat. I expected basic human decency and respect. Clearly, that was too much to ask. Letitia's lips curled into a sneer. Fine. You want a divorce? You've got one. I'll take you for everything you're worth, Robert. Half of everything we own is mine by law. For the first time since the confrontation began, Robert smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Oh, Leticia, you really should have paid more attention to the financial documents I asked you to sign last month. He pulled out a stack of papers from his briefcase. You see, our assets aren't quite as joint as you might think. And as for your little spending sprees, well, let's just say the paper trail leads directly back to you. Embezzlement is such an ugly word, isn't it? Letitia's face went from angry to terrified in the span of a heartbeat. You can't do this. I'll fight you. You'll what? Robert cut her off. Go to Santiago for help. I'm afraid he has his own problems to deal with right now. The SEC is quite interested in some of his business practices. Practices that, coincidentally, you seem to have some knowledge of, given the nature of your pillow talk. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Face it, Letitia. It's over. You played a dangerous game and you lost. I'd start packing if I were you. The locks will be changed by morning. As Robert turned to leave, Letitia's voice stopped him. How long? She asked, her voice small and defeated. How long have you known? Robert paused at the door, not bothering to turn around. Long enough to make sure that when I was done, you'd have nothing left. Not money, not reputation, not even the man you threw away our marriage for. Goodbye, Letitia. I'd say it's been a pleasure, but we both know that would be a lie. The door closed behind him with a final, devastating click. In the silent aftermath, Letitia sank to her knees, the full weight of her actions finally crashing down upon her. And in his study, Robert Riley poured himself another drink, allowing himself a moment of satisfaction before turning his attention to the next phase of his plan. Santiago Lutz wouldn't know what hit him. Letitia's manicured nails drummed an erratic rhythm on the polished surface of Santiago's desk. Her eyes, once sparkling with mischief and desire, now held the desperate gleam of a cornered animal. We have to do something, Santiago, she hissed, her voice raw with panic. Robert knows everything. He's going to destroy us both. Santiago Lutz, the once imposing business tycoon, looked a shadow of his former self. Dark circles marred the skin under his eyes, and a slight tremor in his hands betrayed the strain of the past weeks. Calm down, Letitia, he snapped, though his own voice lacked its usual confidence. Panicking won't solve anything. We need a plan. Letitia leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. What if we made people think Robert was losing it? You know, mentally unstable? Santiago's eyes narrowed, a spark of his old cunning flaring to life. Go on. Think about it. Letitia pressed, warming to her theme. If everyone believes Robert's gone off the deep end, anything he says about us will be dismissed as the ravings of a madman. A slow, cruel smile spread across Santiago's face. Letitia, my dear, I always said you were more than just a pretty face. They spent the next hour plotting, their heads bent close together over Santiago's desk. By the time Letitia left, a plan had taken shape, a desperate, ruthless gambit to salvage their reputations and discredit Robert Riley once and for all. Santiago wasted no time putting their scheme into action. He reached out to his media contacts, calling in favors and making thinly veiled threats where necessary. Within days, the first whispers began to circulate. Did you hear about Robert Riley? I heard he had some kind of breakdown at the office. My cousin's friend works for him, says he's been acting really paranoid lately. The rumors spread like wildfire, each retelling adding new, lurid details. Robert's alleged erratic behavior and paranoid delusions became the talk of the business world, with speculation running rampant about the cause of his supposed mental decline. Meanwhile, Letitia and Santiago weren't content to rely solely on rumor and innuendo. They needed hard evidence to back up their claims, something that would irreparably damage Robert's credibility. We need to get into his accounts, Letitia insisted during one of their clandestine meetings. There has to be something we can use against him. Santiago nodded, already pulling out his phone. I know a guy, hacker, best in the business. If there's dirt to be found, he'll find it. What neither of them realized was that they were playing right into Robert's hands. The cybersecurity measures Tim had put in place were far beyond anything their hired hacker had ever encountered. Every attempt to breach Robert's defenses not only failed, but left a clear trail leading right back to Santiago and Letitia. Frustrated by their lack of progress and growing increasingly desperate, Letitia decided to take matters into her own hands. She reached out to Julie Brock, Robert's ex-girlfriend from before their marriage. The cafe Letitia chose for their meeting was deliberately nondescript, the kind of place that discouraged lingering glances or eavesdropping. Julie arrived precisely on time, her face a mask of polite curiosity. Thank you for meeting me, Julie. Letitia began, her voice honey-sweet. I'm worried about Robert, and I hoped you might be able to help. Julie's eyebrow arched skeptically. Oh, and how exactly am I supposed to do that? Letitia leaned in, dropping all pretense of friendliness. Cut the act. You dated Robert for what? 2 years? There must be something you know, something we can use to show he's not as stable as he pretends to be. Julie's laugh was sharp and without humor. Let me get this straight. You want me to help you destroy the reputation of a man I once cared deeply for, all to save your own skin. She stood, gathering her purse. I think we're done here. As Julie walked away, Letitia felt the last threads of her plan unraveling. She didn't notice the small smile playing at the corners of Julie's mouth, or the way her hand moved to her pocket, where a recording device had captured every damning word. Across town, Santiago was making his own desperate play. He had arranged a meeting with Tim Stafford, Robert's loyal IT expert, at an upscale bar known for its discretion. Mr. Stafford, Santiago greeted, all oily charm and forced camaraderie. Thank you for meeting me. Can I get you a drink? Tim's face remained impassive. I'll pass, thanks. What's this about, Mr. Lutz? Santiago's smile faltered slightly at Tim's cool demeanor. He pressed on regardless. I'll be blunt, Mr. Stafford. I'm concerned about Robert. His behavior lately has been erratic. As his friend and colleague, I'm sure you've noticed it too. Tim said nothing, his silence forcing Santiago to fill the void. I'm prepared to make it worth your while. Santiago continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. $500,000. All you have to do is testify about Robert's unstable behavior at work. For his own good, you understand. The silence stretched between them, Santiago's forced smile growing strained. Finally, Tim spoke. Are you finished, Mr. Lutz? Santiago blinked, thrown off balance. What? Tim stood, his voice cold. Because if you are, I'd like to say this. Robert Riley is 10 times the man you'll ever be. He gave me a chance when no one else would, and I'd sooner cut off my own hand than betray him. He leaned in close, his next words barely above a whisper. Oh, and in case you're wondering, this entire conversation has been recorded. I'm sure Robert will be very interested to hear it. As Tim walked away, leaving a shell-shocked Santiago in his wake, the last pillars of the plan to discredit Robert came crashing down. Unbeknownst to either Santiago or Letitia, their desperate attempts to save themselves had only served to seal their own fates. The press conference room buzzed with anticipation. Journalists from every major network and publication jostled for position. Cameras at the ready. The air crackled with the electric tension that precedes a major story. At precisely 2 p.m., Robert Riley strode onto the small stage. He looked every inch the successful businessman, impeccably tailored suit, not a hair out of place. But there was something in his eyes, a steely determination that sent a ripple of unease through the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert began, his voice steady and clear. I've called this press conference to address the recent rumors concerning my mental health and business practices. A susurrus of whispers swept through the room. In the back, Santiago Lutz shifted uncomfortably, a bead of sweat forming on his brow. I'm aware that there have been questions about my stability, Robert continued. Allegations of erratic behavior, paranoid delusions. I'm here today to put those rumors to rest. He paused, his eyes scanning the room. But first, I'd like to present some information that I think you'll find illuminating. With a nod to an assistant, a series of documents appeared on the large screen behind him. Bank statements, emails, surveillance photos, a damning tapestry of evidence pointing to years of fraudulent business practices. What you're looking at, Robert explained, his voice taking on an edge of steel, is proof of a complex money laundering scheme orchestrated by none other than Santiago Lutz. The room erupted in chaos. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. In the back, Santiago's face had gone ashen. Robert held up a hand, quieting the crowd. I understand you have questions about my mental state. Allow me to address those concerns. He produced a stack of papers, holding them up for the cameras. I have here sworn statements from my colleagues, medical evaluations from top psychiatrists, and video evidence showcasing my competency and the calculated nature of my recent actions. As Robert systematically dismantled every allegation against him, Santiago felt the noose tightening. He edged towards the door, only to find his path blocked by 2 stern-faced security guards. But Robert wasn't finished. I'd like to invite a special guest to join me on stage. Julie Brock, if you would. Julie emerged from the wings, her head held high. Santiago's eyes widened in recognition. The ex-girlfriend Letitia had tried to turn against Robert. Ms. Brock has been working with me to uncover the truth, Robert explained. She has evidence that will put to rest any lingering doubts about the nature of these false allegations against me. Julie stepped up to the microphone, her voice clear and unwavering as she recounted her meeting with Letitia, playing the damning recording for all to hear. The final blow came with another gesture from Robert. There's one more person I'd like you all to hear from. Gabriella Lutz, Santiago's wife, walked onto the stage. Her face was a mask of composure, but her eyes blazed with a mixture of pain and fury. Gabriella, Robert said gently, I'm sorry to have to do this, but I believe you deserve to know the truth. He handed her a folder. These are photos and records detailing your husband's multiple affairs, including his relationship with my soon-to-be ex-wife, Letitia. Gabriella's hands shook as she looked through the contents. When she lifted her head, her voice was steel. "I'd like to make a statement," she said, facing the sea of cameras. "I am hereby announcing my intention to file for divorce from Santiago Lutz. Furthermore, I fully support any investigation into his business practices." The press conference ended in a frenzy of flashing cameras and shouted questions. As security led a shell-shocked Santiago away in handcuffs, Robert made one final announcement. "In light of recent events, I've decided to donate a significant portion of my assets to a charity supporting victims of fraud and infidelity. It's my hope that some good can come from this unfortunate situation." The room erupted in applause, Robert's masterful performance leaving no doubt as to who had emerged victorious in this high-stakes game. The consequences of Robert's revelation rippled through the business world like a tsunami. Within hours, Santiago Lutz found himself in a stark interrogation room, the weight of his crimes pressing down on him like a physical force. His high-priced lawyers, usually so confident and commanding, looked as if they'd aged a decade in a single afternoon. They spoke in hushed, urgent tones, their faces grave. "Mr. Lutz, the evidence against you is overwhelming," the lead attorney said, his voice heavy with resignation. "Given the circumstances, we strongly advise you to consider a plea deal." Santiago's world had narrowed to this moment, the realization that his empire of lies and fraud was crumbling around him. He nodded numbly, the fight gone out of him. "Do what you have to do," he muttered. Across town, Letitia faced her own reckoning. She stood in the foyer of what had once been her home, a single suitcase at her feet. The locks had already been changed, a final, irrevocable sign that her life of luxury was over. Her phone buzzed incessantly calls from so-called friends, no doubt eager to distance themselves from the scandal. She ignored them all, knowing that her social circle had contracted to a cold, empty void. With nowhere else to go, Letitia found herself in a small, dingy apartment on the outskirts of town, the kind of place she would have turned her nose up at just days ago. Now, it was all she could afford, as she sat on a lumpy mattress, staring at the water-stained walls. The full weight of her actions crashed down upon her. She had gambled everything, her marriage, her reputation, her future, and lost it all in spectacular fashion. Meanwhile, Andre and Herbert, Santiago's once loyal associates, were scrambling to save themselves. They'd seen the writing on the wall and wasted no time in turning state's evidence. In sterile interrogation rooms, they spilled every secret, every shady deal, every whispered conversation. Their testimonies were a final nail in Santiago's coffin, revealing the true extent of his criminal network. Gabriella Lutz, shell-shocked but resilient, threw herself into the divorce proceedings with determination. She wanted nothing more to do with the man she had once loved, the man who had betrayed her so completely. In a moment of vulnerability, she reached out to the one person who had shown her true kindness throughout this ordeal. "Robert," her voice wavered slightly over the phone. I just wanted to thank you for telling me the truth, as painful as it was." Robert's response was gentle, understanding. "You deserve to know, Gabriella. I'm just sorry it had to be this way." A pause, pregnant with possibility. "Perhaps, when the dust settles, we could get coffee sometime?" In his office, Robert allowed himself a small smile. "I'd like that, Gabriella. I'd like that very much." As the days turned to weeks, Robert watched with satisfaction as the pieces fell into place. His divorce from Letitia was settled swiftly and decisively in his favor. Santiago Lutz, once the titan of industry, was reduced to a jumpsuit-clad defendant, his empire dismantled brick by brick. To the outside world, Robert Riley was the picture of triumph, the wronged husband who had exposed a web of deceit and emerged stronger for it. His donation to the charity for victims of fraud and infidelity was lauded in the press, his reputation not just salvaged but burnished to a high shine. But in the quiet moments, when the cameras were gone and the accolades faded, Robert felt something. Not regret, certainly. He would make the same choices again in a heartbeat. But a weight, perhaps. the knowledge that he had looked into the abyss of human nature and not flinched away. It was this feeling that led him to the offices of Dr. Perry Dawson, renowned psychiatrist, not out of any sense of guilt or need for absolution, but out of a pragmatic desire to process his experiences and move forward. "Mr. Riley," Dr. Dawson greeted him, his voice neutral and professional. "What brings you here today?" Robert settled into the leather armchair, his posture relaxed but alert. "Doctor, I've just dismantled the lives of several people who betrayed me. I don't regret it for a moment, but I find myself curious about the experience, about my own reactions to it." Dr. Dawson nodded, his pen poised over a notepad. "I see. And how would you characterize those reactions?" A thoughtful pause. Satisfaction, certainly. A sense of justice served. But also a certain coldness. A distance from the person I used to be. "And how do you feel about that distance?" Robert's smile was sharp, devoid of warmth. "I think, Doctor, that's what I'm here to figure out." As the session continued, Robert Riley began the process of examining the man he had become, not with any desire to change or soften the hard edges he had developed, but to understand them, to hone them. Outside the window, the city bustled on, unaware of the quiet reckoning taking place within the confines of Dr. Dawson's office. Robert Riley, the man who had looked betrayal in the eye and emerged victorious, was charting his course for the future, a future where he would never again be the trusting fool, but the master of his own destiny.
I didn't expect it at all. I mean, how could I? Sitting there at the dinner table, enjoying the quiet after a long day, my 42-year-old wife, Sarah, looks me dead in the eye and tells me she's going out to dinner with a colleague. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Dinner with a colleague sounds innocent enough, right? But let's not sugarcoat it. This wasn't just a friendly dinner. It was a date. A full-on, no-holds-barred date with some guy she works with. And she just threw it out there like it was nothing. Now let me backtrack a bit. Sarah and I got married when she was 22. Young, naive, and pregnant. We barely had a clue what we were doing, but we went through with it anyway, like so many young couples do. It's funny, looking back now, people in their 20s these days seem so much more put together than we ever were. But at the time, it felt like the right move. And it wasn't all bad. There were good years, especially at the start. After we tied the knot, I started investing. I'd always had a knack for numbers, and I built a business around it, turning my company into something successful. We became well off, more than comfortable, really. I gave Sarah and our family a life a lot of people would envy. But no amount of money could fix what came next. We had a son, our pride and joy. But he was born sick, real sick. And let me tell you, there's nothing worse than watching your child suffer and knowing that, despite all the money, all the doctors, all the treatments, you can't save him. That kind of helplessness stays with you, haunts you. Our son passed away after years of battling his illness. And Sarah, well, Sarah changed. She withdrew. I get it, grief does that to people. But she didn't just shut down, she shut me out. Completely. We were still married on paper, but emotionally, physically, we might as well have been strangers sharing the same space. I tried everything I could think of. Therapy, vacations, time off work, anything to get her back. But nothing worked. For years, she was like a ghost living in our house, unreachable. It took psychologists a long time to get her to open up even a little. Things improved after a while, but not by much. She wasn't the same, and I wasn't sure she'd ever be again. So, fast forward to that night at the dinner table. She drops the bombshell. She's going out with this guy, her colleague. She had the nerve to act like it was no big deal. He's just a friend, she said. He's been so supportive, and I just need someone to talk to. Yeah, right. I'm not stupid. This wasn't just about talking. Her morale was better, she said. Her energy was up, thanks to him. At that moment, I didn't know what to say. My brain just froze. I mean, how do you respond when your wife casually tells you she's going on a date with another man? I didn't want to explode. I didn't want to argue, so I just stood up and walked out of the kitchen. I didn't even grab my keys, my phone, nothing. I just walked, and she ran after me. I'll never forget the sound of her voice, full of desperation, like she knew she had pushed things too far. "Wait," she called, her footsteps quick behind me. "It's not like that. Please, just listen." But I didn't want to listen. I mean, what was she going to say that could possibly justify this? That it wasn't a betrayal? That this was somehow normal? She begged me to believe her. She said it wasn't cheating. She told me that he was just a colleague and that I was making this out to be worse than it really was. But then she threw in the kicker. "He's helped me feel alive again," she said. "You don't understand how much I've needed this." Needed what, exactly? A dinner? A man who's not me? I was too angry to respond. But one thing was crystal clear. If I told her not to go, she'd still go. I know her. Sarah's the type of woman who always gets what she wants, no matter the cost. The problem is she never seems to think about how high the price might be. I needed to figure out what to do next. I wasn't going to just let this slide. No way. I put up with a lot from her over the years, but this was crossing a line I couldn't ignore. I needed proof. Cold, hard proof of what she was up to. So I called a buddy of mine who knows people. The kind of people who can dig into someone's life and find out everything there is to know. I told him the situation, and he hooked me up with a private investigator. I wanted it all. Who this guy was, how he lived, what his intentions were. I wanted to know where they went, what they talked about, what they did. And yeah, I wanted pictures. I wanted to see them together, up close and personal. Because here's the thing, deep down, I knew this was more than just dinner. I could feel it in my gut. Something was off, and I wasn't about to sit back and watch my life fall apart without knowing exactly what was happening behind my back. So that's where I left things. The PI was on the job, and I was waiting to find out who this guy was, what my wife was really up to, and how the hell I was supposed to deal with it. And yeah, I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just confront her head on? Right then and there. Well, I've learned over the years that sometimes you've got to be patient. Let the truth come to you. And when it does, you hit back hard. But for now, I waited. And that, my friends, is where it all started. The detective didn't waste any time. A few days after I gave him the green light, he came back with the first bit of intel on this guy, Bob. Yeah, his name was Bob. It's always some guy with a boring, regular name, isn't it? But don't let that fool you. Bob wasn't just some nobody. He had a family, 2 kids, a wife, a decent job. The guy lived in a nice house, one of those suburban McMansions with a white picket fence and probably a dog in a yard. The whole picture-perfect life. But you know what they say about appearances, right? Underneath that surface, people like Bob, they're all hiding something. And I was going to find out exactly what that was. The detective didn't just give me the basics either. He went deep. I got everything. Bob's home address, where his kids went to school, what his wife did for work, even what kind of car he drove. All of it laid out for me, like a dossier on the guy who apparently was so supportive of my wife that she felt the need to dress up and go out with him. I stared at his photo for a long time. The dude looked harmless enough, like some average middle-aged guy who'd rather be watching sports than sneaking around with another man's wife. But looks can be deceiving, and I wasn't taking any chances. I'm not stupid. I knew Sarah wasn't telling me the full story, and I wasn't about to sit around waiting for her to come clean. So I started planning. You see, when you've got the kind of money I do, you can make things happen. Big things. And I didn't care how much it cost. This was about my pride, about finding out the truth and getting my revenge. My next move? Well, it required a certain type of person, and I knew just who to talk to about that. I reached out to an old friend. This guy, let's call him Mike, had connections in all the right places, if you know what I mean. He owed me a few favors from way back, and when I told him what was going on, he didn't hesitate. He got in touch with someone almost immediately. This girl, well, let's just say she was exactly what I needed. She was young, 27, maybe 28 at most. Blonde, with legs for days and a face that would make any man do a double take. The kind of woman who could make someone like Bob forget all about his nice little family in the suburbs. When Mike showed me her picture, I didn't even have to think about it. I gave the go-ahead right away. She was perfect. And yeah, I know what you're thinking. You probably have a pretty good idea what this girl does for a living, but I'm not going to spell it out here. I know how Reddit works, and I'm not about to get this post flagged for inappropriate content. Let's just say she was very professional and leave it at that. With her on board, the plan was really coming together. But I wasn't going to stop at just setting Bob up. No, I wanted to cover all my bases. That's why I also put a guy on him, Mateo. This wasn't just about Sarah anymore. I wanted to know what Bob was doing when he wasn't with her, how he spent his time, who else he might be seeing. I needed a full picture, not just some half-assed snapshot of a single date. The private investigator was still digging up dirt, and I had the girl ready to make her move. I was confident that everything would play out just how I wanted. Bob would slip up, guys like him always do, and when he did, I'd be right there to catch him in the act, with all the evidence I needed. But then, out of nowhere, the whole thing nearly blew up in my face. It was the day before the supposed date with Bob when Sarah dropped a bomb on me. We were sitting in the kitchen, and I was playing it cool, acting like I wasn't planning her whole downfall behind the scenes. She looked up from her phone and casually said, "I've been thinking. I'm not going to meet Bob tomorrow after all." For a second, I couldn't even process what she was saying. She wasn't going? After all the effort I'd put into this? After I had everything set up to catch her and Bob red-handed? What the hell was going on? I forced myself to stay calm. "Oh," I asked, pretending to be nonchalant about it. "Why not?" She hesitated for a moment, then said, "I just changed my mind. I don't think it's appropriate. Instead, I'm going to meet up with a friend. We're going to grab dinner at that new restaurant downtown." I stared at her, my mind racing. Something about this didn't sit right with me. Sure, maybe she had changed her mind about Bob. Maybe she realized how fucked up it would be to actually go through with it. But something about the way she said it felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on here than she was letting on. And when Sarah said she was meeting a friend, I had to wonder if this friend was someone else entirely. Was it still Bob? Or was there another guy in the picture? I knew better than to push her on it, though. If I showed too much interest, she'd get suspicious. So I nodded and let her think I was okay with it. But deep down, I wasn't about to let her off the hook that easily. No, the plan was still on. I wasn't going to call off the private investigator or the girl just because Sarah had a sudden change of heart. Whatever she was doing, whether it was with Bob or not, I was going to find out. She could change the narrative all she wanted, but at this point, I had too much riding on the outcome. So, I sat back, pretending everything was fine, while behind the scenes, I set the wheels in motion. And believe me, I was going to catch her. One way or another, Sarah was going to slip up. And when she did, I'd be ready. My gut had been right all along. Sarah was still planning to go on that date with Bob. It didn't matter what she had told me in the kitchen. Her actions spoke louder than her words. The detective confirmed it for me when he sent over the latest update. She had booked a table for two at a nice restaurant, the kind of place we used to go to when things were good between us. But that wasn't the worst part. She also rented a hotel room. And not just any room, a room that cost $400 a night. The kind of room you don't just rent to talk. I knew what was going on. It didn't take a genius to figure it out. Dinner, drinks, and then a night in that expensive hotel with Bob. I could feel my blood boiling just thinking about it. But I had to stay focused. This wasn't the time to lose my cool. I had to act, and I had to act smart. First things first, I assigned one of the two detectives to watch Bob's house. I needed to know if Bob's wife was going to be home while my wife was out screwing around with him. It was part of the plan, and everything had to be timed perfectly. The goal wasn't just to catch Sarah and Bob in the act. I needed to blow up his life too. So, we waited. That's the worst part of this kind of thing. The waiting. Knowing what's happening, knowing what's about to go down, but having to sit on your hands and wait for the right moment to strike. Then the first piece of evidence came in. A photo. It showed Sarah sitting at the table with Bob, looking all cozy, like she didn't have a husband waiting for her at home. But that wasn't what set me off. No, what really made my blood boil was the second photo that followed. It showed them kissing. right there in the middle of the restaurant, like they didn't have a care in the world. Like everything they were doing was perfectly normal. I wanted to lose it. I wanted to punch a hole in the wall, smash something, anything, but I had to keep my head straight. This was just the beginning. I knew they wouldn't stop at the restaurant. The hotel room was waiting, and I had no doubt they were headed there next. But before they could get there, I had another move to make. I called the detective who was stationed outside Bob's house. "Is she home?" I asked, referring to Bob's wife. "Yes, she's home," he confirmed. "Perfect. That was all I needed." I sent the detective the photo of Bob and Sarah kissing, along with some very specific instructions. I'll never forget the rush of satisfaction I felt when I imagined how this was going to play out. The detective knocked on the door, and when Bob's wife answered, she was probably expecting something routine. But what she got was anything but. The detective didn't mince words. He asked her if she knew where her husband was. Of course, she didn't. Bob had told her he'd be working late, just like he probably always did when he snuck around behind her back. So when the detective asked her again, she got nervous. I could almost picture her panic, thinking something terrible had happened to him. But the detective reassured her. "No, he's fine," he said, "but I think you should take a look at this." He handed her the photo, the one of Bob kissing Sarah, and I can only imagine the look on her face. Her world probably started crumbling right there on the doorstep. She stammered something about how Bob was supposed to be at work, that he'd said he'd be home late. But the detective cut her off, calmly letting her know that her husband wasn't working late. He was on a date. I knew exactly what would happen next. As soon as the detective walked away, Bob's wife would be dialing his number, screaming into the phone, demanding answers. And when he saw her name pop up, I bet Bob's heart would skip a beat. He'd make up some excuse, try to calm her down, but she wouldn't be having any of it. No, she'd be in full panic mode. And just like I expected, Bob would rush home, desperate to salvage whatever he could of his mess of a life. While that shitstorm was brewing on Bob's end, I was sitting at home, waiting for Sarah to come back. I had her picture in my hand, the one of her kissing Bob, and I'll tell you what, that was the last time I'd ever feel anything for her again. That image was burned into my brain, and whatever love or respect I still had for her was long gone. But that wasn't the end of it. Not by a long shot. I had more on my sleeve. This wasn't just about catching her in the act or humiliating Bob. No, this was about completely dismantling everything. And while I sat there waiting for Sarah, I was already putting the finishing touches on the next part of my plan. You see, Sarah thought she was clever, thought she could pull this off without consequence. But she didn't realize who she was dealing with. I'd spent years building a business, making connections, learning how to take control of situations and turn them to my advantage. This was just another deal to me, another problem that needed to be solved. And when I was done, she and Bob were going to regret every decision that led them to that dinner table. The moment of revenge was finally within reach. I've been playing the long game, watching everything unfold, and now it was time to pull the trigger. Do you remember that blonde girl I mentioned? The one with the stunning looks. Perfect blonde hair, legs that didn't seem to quit, and a body that could make any man forget his own name? Well, if you didn't pick up on it before, let me make it clearer now. She wasn't just some random girl I met. No, she was the tool I needed to set the final piece of my plan in motion. You might have guessed what her profession was, but I'll keep it vague here for obvious reasons. When Sarah left for her date, the blonde was already at my house waiting. She looked even better in person, dressed in this sleek, tight dress that left little to the imagination. We sat down, shared a few glasses of wine. To be honest, I needed the wine more than she did. I was on edge, not from nerves exactly, but from the anticipation. The knowledge of what I was about to do weighed on me. It's not every day you plan to cheat on your wife, even if it's for revenge. But then again, was this even cheating? Could it be called that when she had already blown up our marriage with Bob? It didn't feel like betrayal, not on my part. This was payback. After a couple more glasses, we headed upstairs. Now let me make one thing clear. There was nothing romantic about what happened next. This wasn't passion. This wasn't love. It wasn't even lust, to be honest. It was just a transaction, something that needed to be done to close the loop on what Sarah had started. The blonde girl was good at what she did, but my mind was elsewhere the whole time. I wasn't thinking about her. I wasn't even really thinking about Sarah at that moment. It was like going through the motions. We started having sex, but it felt more like checking off a box than anything else. There was no emotion, no satisfaction. I wasn't there for the pleasure. This was business. I remember lying there, going through the process, and all I could think about was how Sarah would react when she walked through that door. The shock on her face when she saw me in bed with another woman. That was what I was waiting for. That was the only part of this that mattered. And, sure enough, right on schedule, the front door opened. I heard it creak, followed by her footsteps echoing through the hallway. We didn't stop. I didn't pause, didn't hesitate. I wanted her to walk in on it. I wanted her to see it all. When Sarah finally stepped into the room and saw us, her scream was immediate. She screamed like she had just walked into the middle of a crime scene, and maybe she had. She froze in the doorway, her eyes wide, her face pale, completely stunned by what she was witnessing. It was like everything in her world was crumbling around her in real time, and she couldn't process it. The blonde didn't linger. She got dressed so quickly, you'd think she had been preparing for this exact scenario her whole life. She didn't say a word, didn't even look back as she slipped out of the room and out the front door, leaving Sarah and me alone to deal with the fallout. And then Sarah exploded. I'd seen her angry before, but this was something different. It was like she had lost control of herself completely. She screamed at me, accusing me of betraying her, of being the reason our marriage was falling apart. I couldn't help but laugh, though it was a bitter, humorless laugh. Here she was, yelling at me as if she hadn't just been out with Bob, booking hotel rooms and playing the perfect little mistress. I let her scream for a bit, just watching her unravel. She was pacing back and forth, throwing her hands up, cursing me, calling me every name in the book. And I just stood there, waiting for her to run out of steam. When she finally paused to catch her breath, I pulled out my phone and showed her the photo, the one of her and Bob, mid-kiss in the restaurant. The one she thought no one would ever see. I know about the hotel, I said calmly, holding the phone up to her face so she could see the proof. The one you rented for tonight. The one you thought you'd be spending the night in with Bob. Her expression changed instantly. Gone was the anger, the righteous indignation. It was replaced by shock, maybe even a little fear. She stammered something, tried to explain herself, but I wasn't interested in her excuses. "You're staying there tonight," I said, my voice cold. "That room isn't going to waste." For a second, she didn't say anything. I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to figure out how to salvage this, how to turn it around and make herself the victim. But she couldn't. Not this time. She was caught, and she knew it. She tried to fight back, to throw more blame my way. How could you do this?" she screamed, her voice trembling. "After everything we've been through, you're the one who's cheating now? How can you live with yourself?" I just shook my head. "You think I'm the one who's to blame here?" I asked, incredulous. "You went out with another man. You rented a hotel room with plans to sleep with him. Don't stand there and act like you're innocent in all this." She kept trying to argue, to make it seem like what I had done was worse than what she had been doing for God knows how long. But I wasn't playing her game anymore. I stood my ground, kept my voice level, and told her how it was. I told her that this was her fault, that everything that had happened, from her emotional distance to her affair with Bob, had led us to this exact moment. Eventually, she gave up. She grabbed her purse, fumbled for her phone, and called a taxi. I didn't stop her. I just watched her pack up her things, knowing she was going to that hotel room she had rented for Bob. Only now, she'd be spending the night there alone. When the door finally slammed shut behind her, I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief. Just a cold, empty space where our life together used to be. Sure, the revenge was satisfying in a way, but it didn't fill the void she had left in our marriage. It didn't fix anything. All it did was bring everything to its inevitable end. But this wasn't the end of the story. Not yet. The next part of my plan? That was already in motion. And when it was done, Sarah wouldn't just be humiliated. She'd be destroyed. Filing for divorce was the final nail in the coffin. After everything that had happened, the lies, the cheating, the betrayal, it was the only logical step. I wasn't interested in trying to salvage anything anymore. I wasn't interested in her excuses, her tears, or her attempts to rewrite history. As far as I was concerned, our marriage had ended the moment she stepped out with Bob. The rest was just formalities. I didn't waste any time. I hired the best lawyers money could buy. No half measures, no cutting corners. These guys were sharks, the kind of attorneys who didn't just win cases. They annihilated the opposition. I knew I was in good hands. We sat down, went over everything, and I laid out exactly what I wanted. I wanted her out of my life for good, and I wanted to make sure she walked away with as little as possible. This wasn't about being fair. This was about making sure she paid the price for everything she had done. And trust me, I had the resources to make sure that happened. The first thing I did was block her on my phone. I didn't want to hear from her, didn't want to read her texts, didn't want to listen to her voicemails. Every possible method of communication blocked. If she needed to reach me, she'd have to do it through the lawyers. There was nothing left to say anyway. The moment she left for that hotel, any last shred of care or concern I had for her vanished. We were done. The divorce process, as expected, took time. A lot of time. These things never go quickly, especially when there's money involved. And we had a lot of it to fight over. The house, the assets, the business, it was all on the table. Sarah tried to play hardball at first. She thought she was entitled to half of everything. Thought she could walk away from our marriage with a clean slate and a fat bank account. But she underestimated me. She underestimated what I was willing to do to make sure she got what she deserved, and only what she deserved. We had court dates, meetings with lawyers, depositions, the whole ugly process. And you know what? Not once did we talk. Every time we saw each other in the courtroom, we didn't say a word. We barely even looked at each other. I'd glance over and see her sitting there, trying to look composed, but I could tell she was cracking. She was unraveling under the pressure. This wasn't the Sarah I had married. This was a woman desperately trying to hold on to whatever she could, but she was slipping, and she knew it. My lawyers were relentless. They tore her apart in every negotiation, every hearing. They found every loophole, every clause in our prenup, every bit of financial evidence that worked in my favor. And, of course, the photos of her with Bob, those were the final blow. The evidence of her infidelity was ironclad. She couldn't deny it. She couldn't spin it. She was caught. And the court saw it for what it was, her fault. Her affair. Her destruction of our marriage. The process dragged on for months. At times, it felt like it would never end. But I was patient. I wasn't in a rush. Every day that passed, I knew we were getting closer to the end, and I knew I was winning. I could see it in her face, the way she carried herself, defeated, humiliated. She had gone from trying to fight me tooth and nail to barely showing up to the hearings. I think, deep down, she knew there was no way out for her. Not this time. And then, finally, after what felt like an eternity, the day came when it was all over. The judge handed down the final ruling, and it was exactly what I had hoped for. I walked away with nearly everything: the house, the business, the majority of our assets. Sarah? She was left with scraps. A small, meager settlement that wouldn't last her more than a few months. She tried to argue for more, tried to claim that she needed support, but the evidence was against her. The court sided with me on every major point. It was over. I'll never forget the look on her face when the final ruling was read. It was a mix of disbelief, anger, and something else. Maybe regret? I don't know. I didn't care. All I knew was that I had won. I had taken everything from her, just like she had tried to take everything from me. And she was left with almost nothing. As we left the courtroom that last day, I didn't say a word to her. There was nothing left to say. We were done, finally, completely done. I didn't look back as I walked out the door, and I haven't looked back since. But the truth is, even with all of this behind me, there's no real satisfaction. Sure, I took almost everything from her. Sure, she's out of my life. But there's no victory in this. No feeling of triumph. What's left is just the empty aftermath of a marriage that should have ended long before it did. I won the battle, but the war? The war was hell, and nobody really comes out of that unscathed. It's strange, to be on the other side of all that chaos. To look back at everything, the lies, the betrayal, the divorce, and realize it's finally over. For a long time, it felt like I'd never get to this point, like the mess Sarah had created would follow me forever. But here I am, standing, living, moving forward. The first few months after the divorce were rough. Not gonna lie, I thought that once everything was settled, I'd feel some kind of relief. I thought maybe winning, taking everything from her, would make me feel whole again. But the truth is, nothing really prepares you for the aftermath. You can't just switch off the years of history, the emotional scars, and the weight of it all. There's no magic moment where everything goes back to normal. You have to rebuild. And rebuilding? That takes time. I had to relearn who I was outside of my marriage, outside of the anger and revenge. For so long, everything had been about her, about catching her, exposing her, and getting back at her. Once that was over, I had to figure out what was left of me. I threw myself into my work, expanded my business even further. I poured all my focus into it, and it paid off. The company is thriving, better than ever, and financially, I'm in a great place. Money never solves all your problems, but I'll be honest, it makes things a hell of a lot easier when you're trying to rebuild your life. Therapy helped too. I didn't want to admit it at first, didn't want to sit in front of some stranger and spill my guts. But it worked. I learned how to let go of some of the anger, some of the bitterness. You carry that stuff around for too long, it'll eat you alive. It was a slow process, though. It wasn't like some overnight transformation. It was more like chipping away at a wall, bit by bit, until eventually you can see what's on the other side. I started taking better care of myself, too, physically and mentally. I got back into working out, eating better, and making time for the things I enjoy. I found hobbies I'd forgotten about, things that had nothing to do with Sarah or our marriage. It helped me create a life that felt like mine again, not just something left in the wreckage of what we had. But relationships? That's a different story. I'm not looking for anything. I've learned that some things in life just aren't for me, and relationships might be one of those things. I don't trust the idea of love anymore, not in the way I used to. After everything I've been through, it's hard to imagine letting anyone get that close again, giving someone that kind of power over me. I know people say you should never let one bad experience define you. But this wasn't just one bad experience. This was my whole world, and it collapsed. And honestly, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with being on my own. Some people think you need someone else to complete you, to make life meaningful, but I've learned that's bullshit. You can be whole on your own. You can find peace, happiness, and satisfaction without needing someone else by your side. I don't need a relationship to feel like my life has purpose. These days, my focus is on me, my work, my health, my future. I travel when I wanna, I spend time with friends, I live my life without any drama or bullshit weighing me down. It's simple, it's quiet, and it's exactly what I need. Will I ever change my mind? Maybe. Who knows what the future holds? But for now, I'm done with love, with relationships, with putting my heart on the line for someone else. I've learned that sometimes the only person you can really count on is yourself. And that's enough for me. So yeah, I'm doing well. Better than I have in years. And if that means staying single, staying focused on myself, then so be it. I've earned this peace, and I'm not about to give it up for anyone. Not anymore.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
My name is Mark Tanner. I'm 32, and until recently, I was married. This is the story of how I became unmarried. I met Sophia Winston during my college years. She was a freshman, and I was a junior. We crossed paths in a political science class, a requirement I had put off until my final year. At the time, I was 22 and a former soldier. After serving a year and a half in the Army, I was medically discharged due to a training accident. While riding as a passenger in a helicopter, a ground loop threw me out of an open door. I ended up with 2 broken legs and a broken arm. A steel rod was placed in my left leg, and with that, my military career ended. Using my GI Bill and disability benefits, I enrolled in college. Sophia was 19 and as radiant as the first light of dawn. She stood just shy of 5 feet 8 inches and couldn't have weighed more than 125 pounds. Her green eyes were the brightest I'd ever seen, and her hair was the kind of golden blonde that seemed to catch the sunlight. When she walked into class and took the seat next to mine, she smiled warmly. After class, we walked out together. She introduced herself and asked if I had understood anything from the lecture. I joked that understanding wasn't required, only passing was, and she responded with a laugh, deep and hearty. She then asked if I had time for coffee. I agreed, and over coffee, we got to know each other better. She told me she wasn't dating anyone and that she was serious about her studies, with plans to become a paralegal. I found her intriguing and wanted to spend more time with her. Apparently, the feeling was mutual because when I invited her to dinner and a play the following Friday, she said yes. Our first date went well, and though we didn't become exclusive immediately, we continued dating regularly throughout her freshman year. However, as the end of the school year approached, I started noticing some tension. Occasionally, when I asked her out, she'd mention prior commitments. I wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, but I understood when someone was pulling away. I took her excuses and the shift in energy as a sign that our relationship was cooling off. I stopped asking her out and moved on with my life. I didn't see Sophia over the summer or at the start of the next school year. It wasn't until the second semester of my senior year that we crossed paths again. When I saw her, she looked heartbroken, as if she'd lost her best friend. I greeted her with a casual hi and asked how she was. Her response took me by surprise. With a sharp tone, Sophia asked, "Why do you even care? You haven't called in almost 9 months. Why not?" I explained as calmly as I could. "We weren't exclusive, and after a couple of times when you turned me down, saying you had plans, I figured I wasn't part of those plans." I respected that. I was irritated by her attitude, so I added, "I was ready to become exclusive, but you didn't seem interested. What was I supposed to do? Hang around and settle for leftovers?" I didn't push for more than goodnight kisses because I don't believe in going further without a commitment. Whether you believe me or not, you were the only person I dated after our first time together. She just stood there looking like she could spit nickels and shit dimes when I held up my hand and said, "If you would like to begin dating again, lose the attitude, and remember, my phone and email both work, and you never use them." With that, I went to my class and thought it was over. Sophia called a few days later on a Saturday. I was finishing a paper for one of my classes and let the call go to voicemail. When I was done, I listened to her message. "Mark, I was an idiot, but I was afraid that you wanted to get serious about us last year. I was also mad that you did not at least try to get in my panties. I thought you were either gay or not interested. Can we start over? I have a new cell number, so please call me. I missed you and I'm sorry I was so angry. Goodbye." I called her and explained that I would love to start over, but that I would not make any attempts to get in her pants unless we were exclusive. We dated for about 6 weeks and Sophia asked when I was going to ask to be exclusive. I said sharply, "Never. You are the one that will have to make that decision. I have only dated you since I met you. When you are ready to commit, I will give you my answer." That went over like a noisy fart in church. Sophia started crying and turned and ran away. I did not hear from her for a week. When she called me, she said, "I have thought about us, and while I am scared of this, I want to be with you and only you. If you want, I will commit." I just about dropped the phone and told her I was surprised but pleased. I then said, "Just so you understand, I want you, and I love you. I never said it before, because we were not exclusive. I want you forever, even longer if I can have it." I continued, "Sophia, I don't want you to be scared, and I don't want you angry, but I want you to know that if we make this commitment, it lasts until one of us says no longer. That means no other dates, no plans hidden, no sorry, I'm busy without an explanation. It also means no lies about our feelings. If you can agree to that, we are a couple. If not, please do not come back in my life." She agreed, and we dated until I graduated, and then I asked her to marry me. She said yes, and we started planning. I found a good job with the local office of a large corporation. I was a salesman. I met the rents, and to say that they were underwhelmed is a gross understatement. Sophia's mother was outright hostile, and her father did not even shake my hand when I offered. I was pissed. I said to Sophia, I do not need this treatment. I never did anything to deserve this. You need to decide in about 15 seconds if you are going with me because I am out of here. Sophia looked like a deer in the headlights and did not follow when I left. I called a couple of days later and asked for my ring back. Sophia said if I gave her 10 minutes of my time, she would return the ring. I agreed. When she came over to my apartment, she looked like a bag lady. Her clothes were all wrinkled, her hair was a mess, and her eyes were very red. I was not charitable. I said, the clock is ticking, say what you planned and give me the ring. I have my own problems to deal with, but I will not let your parents screw up my life. Sophia looked down at the floor and started to mumble. I stopped her. The clock is still ticking. Your family hurt me, and now you can't speak plainly to me. Just give me the ring and leave me alone, please? Sophia then looked up and said, you said you would give me 10 minutes. I am sorry I was mumbling, but I am hurt and also mad at my parents. I will write you an explanation because it will take more than 10 minutes to tell all. Here is your ring, and I want you to know that I would marry you with or without my parents' blessing. With that, she handed me the ring and left. About 2 days later, I got a letter in the mail from, of all people, Sophia's father. I opened it and was surprised that it was lengthy. It said, Mr. Tanner, I want to apologize for my actions when you came to meet us. I can offer no valid excuse. I do want you to know why and what happened after you left. The why. Sophia's mother has always felt that she married beneath herself. She is a social climbing wannabe. I am surprised that she hasn't divorced me. Unfortunately, I love the bitch. Sophia's mother has had plans for Sophia to meet and marry one of the rich a-holes that hang around at the coffee shop that my wife works at. Sophia wanted nothing to do with that and said so many times my wife wanted Sophia to go to an Ivy League college. She even went so far as to forge applications to several of them. Sophia was accepted at all of the schools that got her applications. When Sophia found out, she was furious, and she said she would not go to any college that she had not personally applied to. She packed her bags and left the house. She had never come back until she brought you. The crap hit the fan when Sophia called and said she was bringing her fiancé to meet us. She had not even sent a Christmas card in almost 2 years. My wife was angry and said that if I said a nice word or gave a friendly gesture, she was leaving. Unfortunately, you saw the result. This letter is an apology for my lack of backbone. After you left, Sophia started crying and told her mother and me that we had seen the last of her for the rest of our lives. She then tried to catch you before you drove away. She was too late. She came into the house, went to her room, and came out about an hour later with all of the clothes that she had kept here. She called a taxi, and without a goodbye, loaded everything in the cab and left. Again, I am sorry for the treatment you received. Please don't blame Sophia. It was her mother and I that were to blame. Victor Winston. I put the letter down and sat in my chair for almost an hour trying to decide what to do when my phone rang. It was Sophia. Sophia meekly asked, did you get a letter from Daddy? When I said I did, she asked if she could come over. I said yes. Sophia arrived about 20 minutes later. When she came in, she handed me 3 letters. 2 were opened and addressed to her. The third was addressed to me. She asked that I read the open ones and then the one to me. The first one I read was from her father, and it was very similar to the one I got from him, except that at the end he told Sophia that he had moved out and let his wife know that he was fed up with the manipulating bitch, and if she did not stop, he would never come back. The second letter was from her mother. The evil that she spouted was amazing. She blamed Sophia for running her father out of the house. She blamed Sophia's father for being too soft to see what was best for Sophia regardless of what Sophia wanted. Then she blamed the entire male sex for being evil and not worth the bother to hunt them down and kill them. I looked up from that piece of trash and saw Sophia softly sobbing on the chair across from me. She asked, please read the last letter. With shaking hands, I opened the letter addressed to me. As I suspected, it was from Sophia. It was short and to the point. It would not have taken 10 minutes to say, but I read it anyway. Mark, I'm sorry that I hesitated when my family went off on you. I was embarrassed and surprised by their actions. When I was able to move, it was too late. You had already left. I don't blame you. I knew my mother was trying to marry me off to money. I also know that the blow-up was a long time coming, but I did not think she would ever act so nasty to someone besides family. I love you, and I want to marry you. If that means I have to abandon my mother, then I will. As it is, I have totally moved out of the house. When school is out, I will find an apartment near you and work for the rest of my life if necessary to show you how important you are to me. Please don't throw us away. I want to live with you for the rest of my life. Love, Sophia. I was speechless for a few seconds. When I was able to talk, I just said, Yes. Sophia jumped off the chair and almost flew into my lap. She was crying, laughing, kissing, and babbling all at the same time. I waited for her to calm down, and by the time she did, she fell asleep. I carried her into my bedroom and covered her. I went into the kitchen and got a piece of paper and wrote yes on a note and left the engagement ring on it and went to get some food to bring back for both of us. When I got back, Sophia was awake and clutching the note in one hand and the ring in the other. She looked up and smiled. Then she surprised me by giving me the ring and saying, "I screwed up and lost the right to put this back on my finger. Would you honor me by doing that for me?" I was laughing so hard that I dropped the ring not once, but twice. I finally got it on her finger. We talked all of that day and well into the night. Sophia said she had to go because she was tired. I asked why she had to go. I had a spare bedroom, or she could share my bed. I said she could wear one of my t-shirts and a pair of my boxers to bed. I promised that I would not do anything that she did not want. She chose my bed, no clothes, and the next day she moved in. We never again slept in separate beds, except when one of us was out of town overnight. Until the confrontation from the wrong phone. We got married. Sophia's father gave her away. Her mother did not attend. We honeymooned in Niagara Falls, Canada, and stopped for a couple of days in Toronto. Life was good for over 2 years. We had been married for a little more than 2 years when Sophia wanted to start a family. I was ecstatic and said with a Groucho Marx eyebrow wiggle said, "Let's start now." Sophia raced me to the bedroom. We tried to get her pregnant for a few months, and finally, Sophia went to her doctor to see if there was a problem. When I came home from work that evening, she was crying and holding the report. It seems that Sophia's womb was malformed, and every fertilized egg that tried to attach could not. She would never have children. Our life was changed from then on. Sophia no longer seemed to enjoy making love. She stopped wanting to go to any social functions. I finally told her she needed to find a therapist, or I was going to move into the second bedroom. I told her she was no less a woman, nor a less desirable wife, lover, and friend. I said if she wanted, we could look into adoption. Sophia found a therapist. I got a promotion and we moved from the apartment to a rental house. I was still on an upward path at work and felt renting made more sense than buying then selling in 18 months or 2 years if I got promoted out of the office I was in. Life got better. Then the phone. I was running slightly late to get to work, and so I just grabbed my cell phone from the charger and left home. On the drive there, the phone made a strange tone and the screen said, "New text message." I realized then that I grabbed my wife's phone. I did not read the message until I reached my office. I arrived at work, completed all of the start of the workday tasks, and then checked the phone in case the message from my wife was important. When I read the message, I knew my marriage was over. The message was from a neighbor and friend, Caleb Stein. It read, "Hi, sexy. Logan and I want to know if you will meet us in room 417 of the Holiday Inn this afternoon at about 2 o'clock. We are both blowing off work and want a lot of what we have been getting for this past year. You know that a-hole husband of yours doesn't turn you on as a DP sandwich does. Waiting to hear from you. Caleb." I was shocked and angry. I was angry at my so-called friend calling me an a-hole. I was angry finding out my wife was a cheating 304, and I was angry that I had no clue that both them had so little respect for marriage vows and for me. Caleb Stein and his wife Lila were the first friends we made when we moved into the neighborhood. He and she came by as we were moving in and offered to help. Lila became Sophia's friend and loyal sidekick. Logan Hamilton was an a-hole of the first order. He was my age, divorced 3 times for cheating, and always on the lookout for a new woman to conquer. I had warned him twice that if he hit on Sophia again that I would kick his butt. As the clueless husband, I thought that a little revenge was in order. First, I called an attorney that one of the guys in the office used to protect himself from his cheating and greedy wife. His office said they would call back. Second, as we were renting the house we lived in, and were on a month-to-month lease, I called the rental agency and gave them 60 days notice. I told them I would follow up with a written notice. Third, I forwarded the message to all the contacts in Sophia's phone directory. Of course, that included my phone, but surprisingly not Caleb's or Logan's. Fourth, I called Lila and asked for her cell number as I had a message that Caleb sent to Sophia that she should see. I also asked her to meet me at the Holiday Inn at about 1:30. I sent the message and she said she would meet me. Fifth, I responded to Caleb with a copy to my phone that my wife had that I would be there smiling and ready for some fun. Caleb just did not know what kind of fun. The lawyer called me back, and when I explained that I wanted a divorce and I wanted to sue 2 men for adultery, or whatever was the current phrase for cheating scumsuckers, I gave him all of the information and the address to serve my wife. He asked what proof I had. When I told him of the text message, he wanted a copy, so I forwarded it to him. While I was talking to him, Sophia's phone indicated an incoming call. I asked the lawyer what else he needed, and when he was satisfied, I begged off. I checked the missed call log on the phone and saw that it was my phone, so I thought that Sophia was now worried. Good. I did not call her back and shut off the phone. I figured she would try to call Caleb or Logan, but if they didn't show, I would have further proof of her cheating. I took the rest of the day off and went to the hotel to wait. Lila showed up a little early, and we decided to go up to wait at the door of the hotel room. About 1:45, we heard the ping of the elevator. We went to it and stood in front of the door before it opened. When it opened, Caleb and Logan saw us and realized that the jig was up. Logan tried to close the elevator door, but my foot was stopping it. Lila stepped up and slapped Caleb and told him not to come home. I grabbed Logan and reminded him of the warning I had given him. I told him today was his lucky day because I would not do anything to him in front of witnesses, but now he needs to watch his back. I said, "Someday I will find you alone, without anyone around, and that day you will pay for this." I continued, "When I do find you, I will have an ironclad alibi, and you won't care, because it will mean nothing to a corpse." Logan just wilted. I released him and let him close the door. As I expected, I never heard from Logan again. Caleb, on the other hand, tried to blame Sophia, Logan, the neighborhood, the police, the local pastor, anyone but him. I shut him up and said, "Caleb, there is no one to blame but yourself. You knew Sophia was married. You knew you were married. You knew you were cheating. You went ahead and did it regardless of the consequences. Now you will reap those consequences. You have destroyed 2 marriages. If Lila takes you back, she will never trust you again. Sophia is going to find out that I will not take her back. You and Logan are also being named as correspondents in my divorce. You will also receive a notice that I am suing you for the damage you have done to me. I hope you can live with yourself." I left Caleb standing there with his head in his hands and headed for home for probably the last time. I drove around for an hour before I decided that it was time to face up to the problem. When I got home, the place was deathly quiet. Nothing seemed out of place, just quiet. I looked in all of the rooms and in our bedroom. I found Sophia had emptied all of the drawers that held her clothes and emptied the closets of them too. I had a stray thought. How did she move all this stuff without taking the car I bought her last month? I was actually relieved that I did not have to deal with the confrontation on this day. I sat down and tried to think of what else I needed to do. I realized that I still had Sophia's phone. I thought that Sophia probably still had mine. I sent a text message to my phone to ask her to call me. I pushed send and heard noise coming from the kitchen. I knew then that Sophia did not even take a phone. I felt that it was all over now. I sat there and thought of what was next and who I needed to tell about this. The first person I thought of was Victor. I had come to love that guy almost as much as my own father. Then, of course, I needed to call my family. Then I needed to let work know. It went on and on. There was just so much that I was exhausted just contemplating what I had to do. I must have fallen asleep in the chair because that evening I was jolted awake by the phone on the wall in the kitchen. Hoping it was Sophia, I ran to catch it before it went a message. It was Lila, not Sophia. She was asking if I would come over and keep her company for a couple of hours. I realized that she was going through much the same things I was, so I said I would be over. I realized I was hungry and asked Lila if I could bring some pizza or Chinese for us to eat. Lila said, "Yes, I'm hungry, but I would prefer Chinese." I hung up and called the local Chinese restaurant and got a couple of orders for taking out. I knocked on Lila's door about 40 minutes after her phone call. She looked like a wreck. Her eyes were red. What little makeup she normally wore was a mess. She had on a granny dress that went out of style before I was born. I got smart. I set the food down and grabbed Lila in a big and long hug. She said, "Thanks. I know you have the same problems I do, but it's nice to have someone who cares for me show it." We ate, and then went and sat on the sofa in her living room. We talked for probably 3 hours and Lila clung to me the whole time. She finally let go, said thanks, and said she was better now that she knew she hadn't lost a friend. She sort of snorted and said, "Look at me, I lost my husband, my supposed best friend, and I take comfort in a friend who didn't desert me. Thank you, Mark, for being that friend." I left and walked home. I had a troubled sleep, and when I went into work the next day, my boss told me I looked like death warmed over, and when I told him what happened, he said take some time off. I thanked him and went over to the lawyer's office to update him on Sophia's leaving. I also wrote a check for a retainer. The lawyer told me to protect my assets, lock up the bank accounts, cancel all joint credit cards, cancel the ATM card, etc. I went to the bank and moved all of our money from joint to single accounts. Sophia had not touched any of the accounts. The only credit card we had was through that bank, so I canceled that and opened a new account in my name only. I also removed all of the contents of our safe deposit box. I took Sophia's jewelry and set it aside but put all of the other contents in a new box. I made sure that short of a court order that no one but myself would have access to the box. That done, I went back to the house. I called Victor, and he told me Sophia was there, but she did not want to talk to me yet. I told him I would send her jewelry to him. I also explained that if Sophia was going to stay with him, I would have my attorney send the divorce papers there. I told him that it was over, but if Sophia fought the divorce, I would just move and not let her know where I was. I did ask if she had told him why I was suing for a divorce. He said that Sophia told him that we had a major misunderstanding and that she knew the marriage was over. I snorted and told him, ask her about Logan and Caleb and about how she thinks Lila must feel right now. I told him that I considered him a friend and hoped that despite what was happening we could keep in touch. I also told him he should suggest to Sophia that she start seeing her therapist again, and that if she did, I would pay for it. He asked why I would do that if I wanted a divorce. I replied, I don't want a divorce. I need one. There is no trust left in this marriage. I love her more than my own life. If Sophia ever tells you about the real why, you will understand. The lawyer sent the divorce papers to Sophia at her father's apartment. She signed them but changed the proposed settlement to give me everything. That was the last communication we have had. Lila divorced Caleb and moved away. I moved before my 60 days were up. I found a condo near my office that was for rent. I haven't started back in the dating scene, but some of the females, not all of them unattached, in the condo building have been making subtle and not so subtle hints that they are there for me. I'm not seeking, but I think it is going to be fun looking again. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
You know, I always thought Amelia and I had the perfect marriage. We've been together for almost 10 years, and everything seemed fine. No, better than fine. We had the same interests. We were building our life together, and I thought she was happy. But lately, things started feeling off. You know when something just doesn't sit right? Yeah, that's how it felt with her. She started acting distracted, and I could feel her pulling away, declining family dinners, canceling plans with friends, all while working more. At first, I tried to chalk it up to stress or maybe something happening at her job, but the more I noticed, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was going on. The first red flag came when I found this old letter she kept. Nothing dramatic at first, just a few lines about an old friend from her past. Weird, sure, but people hold on to all sorts of stuff, right? But it stuck with me. I remember thinking, who the hell is this guy? She's calling her old friend? And why hadn't I ever heard about him in our decade together? That's when the distance started creeping in. She wasn't the same Amelia anymore. We used to talk, really talk about everything, what we wanted in life, how we'd get there. Now, it's like talking to a brick wall. The late nights at work became more frequent. She'd barely look at me when we were together. And the excuses? God, they just didn't add up. Then came the receipts. Restaurants. Places I knew we'd never been to. Not together anyway. Fancy dinners, way out of the way. I'm sitting here thinking, who the hell is she having dinner with? And I'm not talking fast food. I'm talking white tablecloth, wine by the bottle type places. She'd say it was work, but come on. Who the hell goes to work dinners 4 nights a week? I started digging a little deeper. It's not like I could confront her without proof. So I installed this GPS tracker in her car, slipped some software onto her phone. Don't get me wrong, I felt sick to my stomach doing it. But at this point, I had to know. I needed something. I couldn't just sit around while she went out God knows where with God knows who. That's when I found out about the hotel. Every couple of weeks, she was heading out to this hotel, not even far away, just on the outskirts of town. I'd track her going there, staying for a couple of hours, then heading back home like nothing had happened. Like everything was normal. There were so many little things that started to make sense, like how she'd react when we'd be out with friends, especially when certain topics would come up. One time, we were at dinner with some close friends, and someone brought up old relationships, just as a joke. Amelia froze. Like, completely froze. She changed the subject so fast that everyone noticed. It was weird, and I couldn't let it go. It got even worse when I started getting these calls. Anonymous numbers, whispering crap like, you don't know the whole story about your wife, and she's got a double life, man. What the hell? At first, I thought it was some prank, but after everything else, I wasn't so sure. It was starting to feel like my whole life was built on some bullshit fantasy that was falling apart right in front of me. Then came the final nail in the coffin. A chance meeting with one of Amelia's old acquaintances. Someone she'd never mentioned to me. We bumped into this guy at the grocery store of all places. Casual conversation at first, but when he started talking about the past, things didn't add up. He mentioned stuff Amelia never told me. Places she'd been, people she knew, things that completely contradicted what she'd shared with me. It was like I was learning about a stranger, not my wife. By this point, I wasn't even sure if I wanted to know the truth. But I couldn't stop myself. I had to dig deeper. I was about to uncover things that would change everything. Things that would make me question not just my marriage, but everything I thought I knew about the woman I married. It's funny how you think you know someone. I thought I had Amelia figured out. I thought I knew every little thing about her life before we met. Her childhood, her family, even her exes. But after that encounter with her old acquaintance, I knew something was seriously off. And I couldn't let it go. Not after the hotel trips, the sketchy receipts, and those weird anonymous calls. It wasn't just our marriage on the line anymore. It was everything I thought I knew about her. That's when I started digging into her phone. I know it sounds messed up, but I had to. The GPS tracker already told me she was sneaking around to that hotel, but now I needed to know who she was meeting there. So I pulled up her messages. You wouldn't believe what I found. There he was, the old friend. The messages were all coded, like she was trying to cover her tracks. But after reading through enough of them, it became obvious. They talked about meeting up, sharing moments from their past, places they used to go. But here's the kicker. None of it lined up with what Amelia had told me about her past. The stories she'd shared about her life before me, all bullshit. Suddenly, I wasn't just wondering if she was cheating. I was starting to realize that everything, the last 10 years of our life together, could have been built on lies. The worst part? She didn't just refer to him as some old buddy. No, she called him her old friend, but the way she spoke to him, it was like I was reading some shitty romance novel. They weren't just reconnecting. There was history there, something deep. That's when I knew I couldn't handle this on my own anymore. I wasn't about to confront her without having the full picture. I needed proof, solid, undeniable evidence. So, I did what anyone would do in my situation. I hired a private investigator. The guy I hired, Mike, was a pro. He didn't ask too many questions. He just wanted to know the basics. I gave him all the info, her schedule, the hotel visits, everything. And then I waited. That's when the paranoia really kicked in. Every time Amelia left the house, I wondered if this would be the day I'd find out what the hell was really going on. Every night, she came home late, I found myself staring at her, trying to figure out if she was lying straight to my face. It didn't take Mike long to start sending me updates. And trust me, the shit he uncovered, it rocked me to my core. Turns out, Amelia's old friend wasn't just some dude from her past. He was her ex-husband. Yeah, the same one she told me she left years ago, claiming he was a bad influence and that she wanted nothing to do with him. Well, apparently, that was just another lie in her endless web of bullshit. They'd been in contact for God knows how long, meeting up behind my back like nothing had changed between them. She even traveled to see him when she said she was away for work. I felt sick, but it didn't stop there. Mike sent me photos, pictures of her with him, and not just casual stuff either. We're talking about romantic dinners, hand-holding, kissing in public like they were some star-crossed lovers. Then there were the videos, ones that made it clear they weren't just meeting for drinks. And on top of that, Mike found evidence that she wasn't just seeing her ex. There were other men too, other hotel meetings. It was like every corner I turned, there was more filth waiting for me. I remember sitting at the table with the stack of evidence Mike had given me, just staring at the photos, the videos, all the proof that my wife was a fucking fraud. It's like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I had no idea who I was married to anymore. Was anything she'd ever told me true? The worst part was, I couldn't tell anyone. Not yet. Not until I figured out my next move. but it was eating me alive. My friends, our friends, started noticing something was off. We'd all be hanging out, and they'd make these stupid jokes about relationships and infidelity, not knowing I was living in the middle of it. Amelia was sitting there, laughing along with them, and I'm just gritting my teeth, trying not to explode. There was this one day in particular. We were at a barbecue, and one of my buddies started cracking jokes about how all wives have their secrets. It was meant to be lighthearted, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. Amelia was right there, sipping her drink, pretending like she didn't have a care in the world, like she wasn't sneaking off to hotels with her ex and God knows who else. I wanted to scream at her right then and there, to rip her perfect little facade apart in front of everyone. But I didn't. I played it cool, smiled through the pain. No one knew the truth. Not yet. After that day, things with my friends started to get tense. I didn't want to hang out anymore. Didn't want to be around people who didn't know what was really going on. How could they? I was lying to them just like she was lying to me. And I hated it. Mike kept digging, and the more he found, the angrier I got. I couldn't stop thinking about how I was going to make her pay. But not yet. No, this wasn't the time to blow up. I had to play the long game, just like she had. She thought she was so clever, hiding all these secrets, playing me for a fool. But she had no idea what was coming. After everything I found out, confronting Amelia would have been too easy. I didn't want her just to admit to what she was doing. That would have been letting her off the hook. I needed to hit her where it really hurt. Her career, her reputation, and everything she'd built for herself. The same way she had been slowly tearing apart everything we had, I was going to do the same to her. But I wasn't in a rush. No, I was going to take my time with this. First things first, I needed to get my affairs in order, literally. Divorce was inevitable, and I wasn't about to let her walk away with anything. I contacted a lawyer, a shark, someone who knew how to handle situations like mine. We didn't just talk about splitting assets. We talked strategy. The first thing he told me was to get everything in writing. Emails, messages, photos, videos, anything I could get my hands on that would show the court just how deceitful Amelia had been. It wasn't just about cheating anymore. It was about ruining her in every possible way. Then there was Sophie. Now, I'll be honest, she wasn't part of the plan at first. She was just a colleague, someone I worked with from time to time. Young, attractive, sure, but I hadn't really paid much attention to her before. That all changed when she started flirting with me. Little compliments here and there, lingering looks, and it didn't take long before I realized she was interested. And you know what? After everything Amelia had done, I wasn't about to turn down that kind of attention. I needed a distraction, and Sophie was perfect for that. But more than that, I could use her. Our first few meetings were purely professional, grabbing lunch during work or having coffee in between meetings. But it didn't take long for things to shift. I started looking forward to seeing her. The way she'd laugh at my jokes, the way she'd touch my arm when she talked to me. I knew exactly where this was heading, and I let it happen. It wasn't like I was emotionally involved. I mean, how could I be after what Amelia had done to me? Sophie was just another tool in my plan, and I was going to use her to my advantage. The first time we hooked up, I made sure to record it. Every kiss, every whisper, every little moment, I documented it all. It wasn't about the sex, although I'll admit, it felt good to have someone who actually wanted to be around me. But I wasn't stupid. I knew this was just another weapon in my arsenal. When the time came, I was going to use it all against Amelia. She thought she had secrets? Well, so did I. Meanwhile, I wasn't just sitting around waiting for the perfect moment to drop the bomb. I was already starting to lay the groundwork. Through my connections, I began to spread subtle rumors about Amelia at her workplace. It wasn't hard. People love gossip, especially when it's about someone who's been climbing the corporate ladder as quickly as she had. It started small. Whispers about her personal life, comment about her taking long trips, about how she seemed distracted at work. I didn't even have to do much. People's imaginations took care of the rest. I even started forging a few documents. Nothing crazy, just little things that made it seem like she was mismanaging things at work. I knew a few people in her professional circle who had it out for her anyway. I made sure they had the right information at their disposal. Before long, Amelia's reputation started to take a hit. People were questioning her professionalism, her ability to manage her team, and even her loyalty to the company. All the while, Amelia had no idea what was happening. She still came home, still pretended everything was fine. She was still sneaking off to meet her ex, probably thinking I was too blind or too stupid to notice. But I noticed everything. I controlled everything now, and she had no clue. Things with Sophie continued to develop. At first, I didn't think much of it, but over time, I started to actually enjoy being around her. She was easy to talk to, fun, and completely different from the cold, distant version of Amelia I had to deal with every day. We started spending more time together, after work on weekends. She thought it was becoming something real, and honestly, I was starting to feel that too. But I wasn't about to let my guard down. Not after what had happened with Amelia. I was in control this time. I kept Sophie in the dark about the full extent of what was going on. She didn't know that I was using her as part of my revenge plan. She thought she was just a girl falling for a guy whose marriage was falling apart. And maybe, in some twisted way, that was true. But this wasn't about her. This was about destroying Amelia. As the weeks went by, I could feel things moving toward the inevitable confrontation. Amelia was starting to feel the pressure at work. She'd come home stressed out, complaining about her colleagues being distant, about people questioning her decisions. She couldn't figure out why her career was suddenly on the rocks. And I'd just sit there, nodding along, pretending to be the supportive husband, while knowing damn well I was the one pulling the strings behind the scenes. But I wasn't done yet. No, there was more to come. I was going to hit her where it hurt most, and when it all came crashing down, she wouldn't even know what hit her. I wasn't wasting any more time. Amelia had to feel it. Everything I'd been feeling since I discovered her betrayal. It was time for the first blow, the one she wouldn't see coming. I made sure the evidence of her infidelity landed in the hands of exactly the right person, one of her biggest professional rivals. You see, Amelia had clawed her way up in her career, making a few enemies along the way. She liked to play the part of the perfect professional, always smiling and shaking hands. But behind the scenes, she was ruthless. I knew just the person who'd love to see her taken down a peg. It was almost too easy. I dropped some well-timed anonymous hints, shared a few photos that couldn't be explained away, and within days, the rumor mill started spinning. By the time Amelia walked into the big client event, the whispers were already spreading like wildfire. She had no clue, of course. Why would she? As far as she knew, she was still in control, keeping her dirty little secrets safe. That night, the event was packed. Everyone who mattered in her professional circle was there, clients, bosses, and the people who could make or break her career. I was there too, pretending to be the supportive husband, smiling at her side while she schmoozed and laughed with people who were about to turn their backs on her. It was almost poetic, really. I watched from a distance as the whispers reached her. First, it was just a few sideways glances. Then the quiet conversation started. Amelia noticed, of course. She's sharp. She knew something was off, but she couldn't figure out what. I could see the confusion growing on her face as she tried to navigate through the crowd, acting like everything was fine. And then the moment came. One of her colleagues, someone who used to be in her corner, cornered her. They didn't say much, but I could see the way they looked at her. The judgment, the disdain. They knew. And Amelia? She had no idea how they found out. She stood there, stunned, as the realization hit her. The perfect little world she'd built was starting to crack. I could tell she was rattled. She tried to pull me aside at one point, whispering about how weird people were acting, how something felt off. "Do you think someone's spreading rumors?" she asked, her voice shaky. I just shrugged, playing dumb. "I'm sure it's nothing," I said, hiding the smirk tugging at my lips. Meanwhile, things with Sophie were getting complicated. What started as something I used for revenge was starting to shift. We'd been meeting in secret, keeping things under the radar, but I could feel the tension building. It wasn't just about sex anymore, though that was part of it. Sophie was getting emotionally invested, and I could tell she was starting to sense that I wasn't just in this for the fun of it. She'd asked me more than once if I was sure I was ready to move on from Amelia, if this was really what I wanted. I lied, of course, told her what she wanted to hear. Of course, I'm ready, I'd say, kissing her, knowing full well I was still focused on destroying Amelia. Sophie wasn't stupid, though. She was starting to see the cracks in my story, starting to suspect that I had other motives. But she was in too deep by now. She cared about me, at least she thought she did, and I knew she wasn't going to back out. But back to Amelia. After that event, things went downhill fast. Word had spread, and her professional reputation was taking a hit. Clients were questioning her integrity, colleagues were distancing themselves, and I watched it all play out with a sick sense of satisfaction. I'd set the wheels in motion, and there was no stopping it now. Still, she didn't have a clue that I was behind it all. She started acting paranoid, accusing people at work of talking behind her back, and even coming home and venting to me about it. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was the one pulling the strings, and she was too wrapped up in her own web of lies to see it. I started pushing her, little by little, trying to get her to admit what she'd done. I'd make comments about trust, about loyalty, about how secrets always come out in the end. But every time, she'd deny it, stubborn as hell, refusing to admit what was right in front of her. I'd look her in the eyes and ask, "Are you sure there's nothing you need to tell me?" And every time, she'd look right back and say, "No, of course not." It was infuriating, but also kind of satisfying. She thought she was still in control. She had no idea that the walls were closing in. And Sophie, well, she was starting to catch on. She wasn't dumb. She could feel the distance between us, even though we were still meeting up regularly. She'd ask me, "Are you just using me to get back at your wife?" And I'd always brush it off. But I could see the doubt in her eyes, the way she hesitated before letting things go further. I knew I had to make a choice soon. Either I was going to keep using Sophie as part of my plan, or I'd have to be honest with her. But for now, I was too focused on Amelia's downfall. The real show was just getting started, and I wasn't about to lose control of it. I'd been planning this moment for weeks. Every move I'd made, every piece of evidence I'd collected, it was all leading to this. The day I would expose everything and finally let Amelia know that I wasn't the clueless husband she thought I was. I wanted her to feel the humiliation, to understand the consequences of everything she'd done. And the best part? She had no idea it was coming. The lawyers had already been involved for a while. But this was the day we'd sit down and discuss the divorce terms. But before any paperwork was signed, I had one last trick up my sleeve. I made sure her lawyer would be there too. The guy looked smug, probably thinking he was going to get her a sweet deal. He had no idea the bomb I was about to drop. We sat in the meeting room, Amelia, her lawyer, my lawyer, and me. She was dressed in her usual professional style, confident as ever. But underneath that polished exterior, I could sense she was on edge. Her career had been in free fall for weeks, ever since the rumors about her affair started circulating. She was losing clients, colleagues weren't returning her calls, and her reputation was hanging by a thread. Still, she thought she had control over me, over this divorce. How wrong she was. I slid the folder across the table. Photos, texts, emails, everything that tied her to her ex-husband and the string of other men she'd been sneaking around with. I didn't say anything at first, just watched her face as she opened it and started flipping through the evidence. Her hands started shaking. "Where the hell did you get this?" she hissed, her voice low but full of panic. I leaned back, crossing my arms. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out, Amelia? You've been lying to me for years. You didn't just cheat. You lied about your entire life. And now it's all out in the open." Her lawyer tried to keep his composure, but even he looked rattled. "We can discuss this privately," he said, already scrambling to figure out how they were going to salvage the situation. But I wasn't done. Not yet. "Oh, I'm not interested in keeping this private. I said, my voice steady. In fact, I think it's time we bring this out into the light. I'm tired of the lies, and I'm tired of playing nice. Amelia's face went pale, and she knew what was coming. The final blow. I had planned a public event. One of those big corporate dinners where all the major players in her professional circle would be present. I'd arranged for the evidence to leak just before the event. By the time she showed up, everyone would know the truth. It went exactly as I expected. When she walked into the room that evening, you could feel the shift in energy. People stared, whispered, and started moving away from her like she had the plague. Amelia, still clueless about the full extent of what was happening, tried to make her usual rounds, smiling and pretending everything was normal. But then the questions started coming. First, it was subtle, small talk about her personal life, questions she couldn't dodge. Then someone, I don't even remember who, came out and said it outright. So, how's your ex-husband doing? Still meeting up with him on the side? Amelia's face fell. She tried to keep it together, but it was too late. The room had already turned against her. She stumbled through a half-baked excuse, trying to laugh it off, but nobody was buying it. It was over. She lost it. Right there, in front of everyone, Amelia broke down. She tried to justify herself, blaming me, blaming her job, even blaming the pressure of our marriage. But the more she talked, the worse it got. Nobody believed her anymore. The people who used to hang on her every word, the friends she thought she had, they all turned their backs on her. It was brutal, and I watched it all happen with a sense of cold satisfaction. After the event, things moved fast. The divorce was inevitable, but now I was in control. She knew it. Her lawyer knew it, and even my lawyer had a smug look on his face the whole time we negotiated the terms. Amelia tried to push back, tried to hold on to what little she had left, but I wasn't playing nice anymore. I made sure she lost a significant portion of our assets. All that hard work she'd put into her career, gone. The life we built together, shattered. We met again with the lawyers to finalize the terms. It was tense. Amelia sat across from me, looking like a shadow of the confident woman she used to be. Her lawyer was doing his best to salvage something for her, but there wasn't much he could do. The evidence was overwhelming. The affairs, the lies, the money she'd spent on her secret trips, all of it was laid out in black and white. Amelia tried to make eye contact with me a few times, probably thinking she could talk her way out of this like she always did. But I was done. I didn't say much, just nodded along as my lawyer tore apart every argument her side tried to make. By the end of the meeting, it was clear. She was screwed. After the papers were signed, she tried one last time to reach out. Dan, please can we talk? I didn't mean for any of this to happen. We can fix this. You don't have to do this. I didn't even bother looking at her. There's nothing left to talk about, Amelia. You made your choices, and now you're going to live with them. And that was it. I walked out, leaving her there with the wreckage of her life. The divorce was finalized, and I came out on top. Amelia, on the other hand, she had nothing left. No career, no reputation, and no friends. She was completely alone. After the divorce was finalized, I finally felt it, a weight lifting off my chest, like I could finally breathe again. The months of scheming, tracking, planning, and executing my revenge had left me exhausted, but the satisfaction was undeniable. I had walked away with most of our assets, and Amelia? Well, her career was in ruins. The colleagues who once admired her had turned their backs, and her former lover didn't even want to be associated with her. She had nothing left, and I wasn't looking back. But what came next surprised me. It wasn't just the satisfaction of seeing Amelia's life crumble that gave me relief. It was the realization that I could finally close that chapter of my life for good. Amelia had been a toxic weight around my neck for years, but now, with her gone, I could focus on something new, something real. That's when things with Sophie started to shift. What began as a tool in my revenge plan had turned into something much more. Sophie and I had been seeing each other for months, and at first, I'll admit, it was all about getting back at Amelia. But somewhere along the line, it stopped being about her. Sophie became more than just a fling. I found myself looking forward to our time together, not just for the physical stuff, but for the connection we were building. It wasn't immediate, though. After what I'd been through, I wasn't about to throw myself into another relationship blindly. I kept my guard up, and Sophie knew it. She'd asked me about my past, about what I wanted moving forward, and for once, I didn't have all the answers. But I knew one thing. I was tired of revenge. I didn't want to live in the past anymore. I wanted something real, something that wasn't built on lies or manipulation. As the weeks turned into months, Sophie and I grew closer. We talked about our future, about starting fresh. Eventually, we made the decision to move out of the city, to leave behind the mess that had been my life with Amelia. We found a new place, nothing too flashy, but it felt like home. A place where we could start over, without the shadow of my past hanging over us. I even started thinking about opening a business with Sophie. She had always been sharp, business-minded, and together, we had a lot of potential. It wasn't just about building something professionally. It was about building something together. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. I wasn't consumed by anger or revenge anymore. I was focused on the future. Meanwhile, Amelia was spiraling. Word had gotten back to me that she'd left the city, trying to start over somewhere new. But her reputation had followed her. Every time she tried to land a new job, her past would catch up with her. No one wanted to hire someone who had been publicly exposed for the kind of betrayal she'd committed. Even her family, who had always supported her, started to distance themselves. They couldn't look past the lies, the affairs, the mess she'd made of her life. A few months after the divorce was finalized, Amelia tried to reach out to me. I don't know what she expected. Maybe she thought I'd be open to some kind of reconciliation, or that I'd feel guilty about what happened to her. But when I saw her name pop up on my phone, I didn't even hesitate. I ignored her call, just like I ignored the dozen messages she left after that. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. I didn't know her anything. I heard through the grapevine that she had fallen into depression, that she was struggling to keep her life together with no job, no friends, and no one to turn to. There was a time when I might have felt bad for her, when I might have considered helping her. But not anymore. Amelia wasn't my problem. Not anymore. One evening, Sophie and I met up with some old friends, people who used to know Amelia, who had seen everything play out. They were shocked by how far I'd come. "You look like a new man," one of them said. "I can't believe how much has changed." And they were right. I wasn't the same man I had been when this whole thing started. I wasn't the bitter, angry guy who was obsessed with revenge. I'd changed, grown. I wasn't defined by what Amelia had done to me anymore. She was a part of my past, but she wasn't going to define my future. As the evening went on, the conversation turned to Amelia, and someone asked me how she was doing. I shrugged. I don't really know. I don't keep up with her anymore. They were surprised, of course. They expected me to care, to have some lingering feelings about her downfall. But I didn't. Amelia's life was her own mess to deal with. I had moved on, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. Sophie and I left that night, hand in hand, walking down a new path together. My life had been torn apart, rebuilt, and transformed. And now, I was ready for whatever came next. Amelia was just a memory, a reminder of who I used to be and how far I'd come.
Welcome back to Cheating Tales Lab. Thank you for tuning in. We've got another gripping story for you today, and we hope it keeps you entertained. Let's not wait any longer. Let's dive into the story. Franklin Browning's flight touched down at 2:17 p.m., a full 3 hours earlier than expected. As he strode through the airport, his mind raced with possibilities. The breakthrough he'd made on his sustainable water filtration project could change everything, not just for his career, but for millions without access to clean water. He hailed a cab, barely noticing the driver's attempt at small talk. Franklin's fingers tapped restlessly on his briefcase. Inside were the notes that could revolutionize his field. He couldn't wait to share the news with Stella. She'd been supportive through all the late nights and missed dinners. Now he could finally show her it was worth it. The cab pulled up to their modest apartment building. Franklin paid quickly, grabbed his luggage, and bounded up the stairs 2 at a time. He fished for his keys, then paused. Stella's voice drifted through the door, low and intense. "I can't take it anymore, Anthony," she was saying. "Franklin's always working, and when he's home, he's obsessing over his world-changing ideas. What about my dreams? My need for adventure?" Franklin's hand froze on the doorknob. His mind reeled, trying to process what he was hearing. Stella continued, her voice dripping with contempt. "You're right, Anthony. I deserve better. Someone who can give me the life I want." The world tilted sideways. Franklin steadied himself against the wall, his breath coming in short gasps. This couldn't be happening. Not after everything they'd been through together. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. Then he turned the key and stepped inside. Stella whirled around, her face draining of color. "Franklin, I didn't know you were home," she stammered, fumbling to end the call. "Clearly," Franklin replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He set down his briefcase with deliberate care. "I think we need to talk." Stella's eyes darted around the room, looking everywhere but at her husband. "Talk? About what?" "I was just on the phone with a friend." "A friend?" Franklin's tone was flat. "And does this friend have a name?" "Anthony, perhaps?" Stella's posture stiffened. "You were eavesdropping?" "I came home early to surprise you," Franklin said. "Seems I'm the one who got the surprise." The silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. Then something in Stella's expression shifted. The fear vanished, replaced by a cold anger. "Fine," she spat. "Yes, I was talking to Anthony. And you know what? I'm glad you heard. I'm sick of pretending everything's okay when it's not." Franklin fought to keep his voice level. "And what exactly isn't okay, Stella? I thought we were building a life together, working towards our goals." Stella laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Our goals? You mean your goals? Your precious work that always comes first. When's the last time you asked about my dreams?" "I've always supported your dreams," Franklin said, struggling to understand. "I thought we were in this together." "Together?" Stella's voice dripped with scorn. "You're so naive, Franklin. While you've been chasing your fantasy of saving the world, I've been suffocating. Anthony sees me for who I really am. He wants to give me the life I deserve." Franklin's jaw clenched. "The life you deserve? And what life is that, exactly?" Stella's eyes glittered. "Adventure, excitement, passion, all the things you've forgotten about while you're buried in your work. Anthony's taking me to Bora Bora next month. When's the last time you even took me to dinner?" The words hit Franklin like a physical blow. He thought of all the nights he'd worked late, convinced he was doing it for their future. Had he really been so blind? "So that's it?" he asked, his voice tight with anger and hurt. "You're throwing away our marriage for a vacation?" Stella stalked towards him, her face flushed. "It's not about the vacation, Franklin. It's about the life I deserve. Anthony can give me that. You can't." She paused, then delivered the final blow. "I want a divorce." Franklin stood rooted to the spot, his mind reeling. The life he thought he knew was crumbling around him. But beneath the shock and pain, something else stirred. A cold, hard resolve. "A divorce," he repeated, his voice devoid of emotion. "Is that really what you want, Stella?" She nodded, chin lifted defiantly. Franklin's eyes narrowed. "Then you'll get one. But don't think for a second this ends here." He turned on his heel and strode to the bedroom, yanking open drawers and shoving clothes into a suitcase. Stella followed, her bravado faltering slightly. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Leaving," Franklin said shortly. "You made your choice. Now you can live with it." He zipped the suitcase closed with more force than necessary. As he brushed past Stella, she grabbed his arm. "Franklin, wait. We should talk about this. About arrangements." He shook off her hand. "We'll talk through our lawyers. You wanted a divorce, Stella. Congratulations. You've got one." With that, he walked out the door, not sparing a glance behind him. The cool evening air hit his face as he emerged from the building. He hailed a cab, giving the address of a nearby hotel. As the city lights blurred past the window, Franklin's mind raced. The excitement of his breakthrough seemed a lifetime ago. Now, all he could think about was how quickly everything had fallen apart. But beneath the turmoil, a steely determination took root. Stella thought she could discard him so easily? She had no idea what was coming. Franklin Browning was not a man to be trifled with, and he would make damn sure she remembered that. The weeks that followed were a blur of work and legal meetings. Franklin threw himself into his project with renewed vigor, channeling his pain into determination. The water filtration system became his obsession, his reason for getting up each morning. Stella, for her part, seemed intent on making the divorce as painful as possible. Her demands were outrageous, her attitude spiteful. Franklin weathered it all with a cold detachment that unnerved even his own lawyer. At the office, Franklin's colleagues noticed the change in him. Gone was the easygoing researcher, replaced by a man of singular focus and drive. No one dared to slack off or question his methods. All except Susan Chun. Susan had been Franklin's friend and fellow environmental engineer for years. She watched his transformation with growing concern. One night, as the office emptied and Franklin remained hunched over his computer, she decided to intervene. "Franklin," she said softly, approaching his desk, "are you okay? You've been here day and night." He looked up, his eyes bloodshot but focused. "I'm fine, Susan. Just focused on making this project work. It's all I have left." Susan hesitated, then pulled up a chair. "You know that's not true. You have friends here. People who care about you." Franklin's expression softened slightly. "I appreciate that, Susan. I do. But right now, I need to concentrate on this. It's the only thing keeping me sane." Susan nodded, understanding in her eyes. Then she straightened, her tone becoming more businesslike. "Well, in that case, I have some news that might interest you. There's a major corporation interested in our filtration system. They want to meet next week." For the first time in weeks, a spark of genuine excitement lit Franklin's eyes. "Really? Who?" "Global Hospitality Group," Susan said. "They're looking to implement eco-friendly systems in their resorts worldwide. If we can impress them, it could be huge for us." Franklin nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. "Then we'd better be ready to blow them away." As Susan left, Franklin reflected on their friendship. She'd been his rock through this ordeal, always there with a word of encouragement or a fresh perspective on their work. For the first time since that fateful night, he felt a glimmer of hope. He turned back to his computer, fingers flying over the keyboard. Stella thought she'd broken him. Anthony thought he could steal Franklin's life. But they had no idea what he was capable of. This project wasn't just about clean water anymore. It was about proving to the world, and to himself, that Franklin Browning was a force to be reckoned with. As the night deepened, Franklin worked on, fueled by determination and the promise of redemption. The city slept, unaware that within its midst, a man was forging a plan that would change not just his life, but countless others. And when the dust settled, those who had underestimated him would learn the true cost of their mistake. 2 years had passed since that fateful night when Franklin Browning's world shattered. The pain of betrayal had long since hardened into cold determination. Now, he stood in a sleek boardroom, facing a panel of executives from Global Hospitality Group. His patented water filtration system, once just a dream, was about to become a reality. Franklin's eyes swept the room, taking in the expectant faces. He'd rehearsed this presentation countless times with Susan. Every word, every slide, was perfectly calibrated for maximum impact. He wouldn't let this opportunity slip away. "Gentlemen," Franklin began, his voice steady and confident. "What you're about to see will revolutionize water usage in the hospitality industry." For the next hour, Franklin laid out his vision. He spoke of sustainability, of drastic reductions in water waste, of the potential to bring clean water to drought-stricken regions. The executives leaned forward, their eyes gleaming with interest. As Franklin concluded, a heavy silence fell over the room. Then, slowly, Gilbert Guerrero, the CEO of Global Hospitality Group, began to applaud. The other executives followed suit. "Mr. Browning, Gilbert said, standing to shake Franklin's hand. That was truly impressive. Your system could indeed revolutionize water usage in our resorts worldwide. Franklin allowed himself a small smile. Thank you, Mr. Guerrero. I'm glad you see the potential. Gilbert nodded, then paused, his expression turning serious. We're not just interested in licensing, Mr. Browning. We want to acquire your company outright. Franklin's pulse quickened. This was it, the moment he'd been working towards for years. But he couldn't show his excitement. Not yet. I'm open to discussing terms, Mr. Guerrero, Franklin said carefully. But I have one condition. Gilbert raised an eyebrow. Oh. Franklin met his gaze steadily. I want a controlling stake in your Bora Bora resort. The room fell silent. Gilbert's eyes narrowed slightly, a mix of confusion and intrigue on his face. That's an unusual request, Mr. Browning. May I ask why? Franklin maintained his composure, his voice cool and professional. Let's just say I have a personal interest in seeing this particular property succeed with our new technology. Gilbert studied Franklin for a long moment, then slowly nodded. I see. Well, Mr. Browning, you've certainly piqued my curiosity. Why don't we discuss this further over dinner? I have a feeling there's an interesting story behind this request. As the meeting adjourned, Franklin felt a surge of triumph. He was one step closer to his goal. Stella and Anthony thought they'd left him behind, broken and defeated. They had no idea what was coming. Later that evening, over a lavish dinner, Franklin laid out his vision for the Bora Bora resort. He spoke of making it a showcase for sustainable luxury, a model for the entire industry. Gilbert listened intently, clearly impressed by Franklin's passion and knowledge. You drive a hard bargain, Mr. Browning, Gilbert said as they shook hands at the end of the night. But I think we can make this work. Our legal team will draw up the paperwork. Welcome to Global Hospitality Group. Franklin allowed himself a genuine smile. Thank you, Mr. Guerrero. I look forward to our partnership. As he left the restaurant, Franklin pulled out his phone and dialed Susan's number. Well? Susan's voice was tense with anticipation. We did it, Franklin said simply. They're buying the company, and I'm getting Bora Bora. Susan's whoop of joy echoed through the phone. Franklin, that's amazing. I knew you could do it. We did it, Susan, Franklin corrected her. I couldn't have done this without you. There was a pause on the other end of the line. So, what happens now? Franklin's voice hardened slightly. Now? Now we prepare for phase 2. Weeks of intense negotiations and paperwork followed. Franklin threw himself into the work, fine-tuning every detail of the agreement. Finally, the day arrived. Franklin stood in Gilbert's office, pen in hand, ready to sign the final documents. Mr. Browning, Gilbert said, a note of admiration in his voice. I must say, you've impressed me at every turn. Are you sure you won't reconsider my offer to join our board of directors? Franklin shook his head, smiling slightly. Thank you, Mr. Guerrero, but I prefer a more hands-on approach. I'll be heading to Bora Bora next week to oversee the implementation personally. Gilbert nodded, understanding in his eyes. Of course. Well, I look forward to seeing the results. Good luck, Mr. Browning. As Franklin signed his name with a flourish, he felt a sense of grim satisfaction. The pieces were falling into place. Stella and Anthony had no idea what was coming. The flight to Bora Bora was long, but Franklin hardly noticed. His mind was consumed with plans and strategies. As the plane touched down, he took a deep breath. This was it, the moment he'd been working towards for 2 years. Franklin stepped off the plane, the warm tropical air enveloping him. A man in a crisp suit approached, hand extended. Mr. Browning? I'm Arthur McCarty, the resort manager. It's an honor to have you here. Franklin shook his hand firmly. Thank you, Mr. McCarty. I'm looking forward to seeing the property. As they walked towards the waiting car, Arthur launched into an enthusiastic description of the resort. Your filtration system is already making waves in the industry, Mr. Browning. We've had inquiries from other resorts asking about it. Franklin nodded, only half listening. His eyes scanned the surroundings, taking in every detail. Somewhere on this island, Stella and Anthony were living their dream life. He allowed himself a small, cold smile. Not for much longer. The resort was impressive, a sprawling complex of luxury bungalows and pristine beaches. As Arthur led him on a tour, Franklin made mental notes. He'd need to know every inch of this place for his plan to work. They were passing the main bar when Franklin froze. There, behind the counter, was a familiar face. Anthony Levine, looking considerably less polished than Franklin remembered, was mixing drinks for a group of tourists. Their eyes met. Anthony's face drained of color, his hand fumbling the bottle he was holding. "Is something wrong, Mr. Browning?" Arthur asked, noticing Franklin's sudden stillness. Franklin's voice was cool when he replied, "No, nothing at all. But I think we need to review the staff roster. I have some concerns about quality control." Arthur looked confused but nodded. "Of course, sir. We can do that right away if you'd like. Tomorrow will be fine," Franklin said smoothly. "For now, I'd like to see my accommodations. It's been a long flight." As they walked away, Franklin could feel Anthony's eyes boring into his back. He allowed himself a small, satisfied smirk. Let him sweat. Later that evening, Franklin sat in his luxurious suite, poring over the staff files Arthur had provided. Anthony's was near the top, a flimsy cover story about his bartending experience. Franklin snorted. It was almost too easy. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Arthur, looking nervous. "Mr. Browning, I hope I'm not disturbing you. But after our conversation earlier, I did some digging. It seems there are some irregularities with a few of our employees' backgrounds, particularly the bartender you noticed." Franklin leaned back in his chair, expression neutral. "Is that so? Tell me more, Mr. McCarty." Arthur shifted uncomfortably. "Well, sir, it appears Mr. Levine may have exaggerated his qualifications, and there are some gaps in his employment history that don't add up." "I see," Franklin said slowly. "And what do you recommend we do about this, Mr. McCarty?" Arthur straightened, seeming relieved to be on familiar ground. "Standard procedure would be to suspend him pending a full investigation. If the discrepancies are confirmed, termination would be the next step." Franklin nodded, a plan forming in his mind. "Let's hold off on that for now, Mr. McCarty. I have a feeling Mr. Levine might have some interesting information to share. Keep this to yourself for the moment. I'll handle it personally." Arthur looked uncertain but nodded. "Of course, Mr. Browning, whatever you think is best." As Arthur left, Franklin turned to look out the window at the moonlit beach. Everything was falling into place. Anthony was working a dead-end job, clearly struggling, which meant Stella couldn't be far behind. Franklin's lips curved into a cold smile. It was time to spring the trap. The next evening, Franklin made his way to the resort's main restaurant. He'd chosen a table with a clear view of the entrance, ordered a bottle of expensive wine, and settled in to wait. He didn't have to wait long. Just as his main course arrived, he saw her. Stella walked in, and Franklin felt a jolt of satisfaction. She looked tired, her designer clothes from 2 years ago now looking slightly shabby. The glowing, carefree woman who'd left him was gone, replaced by someone who looked desperate. Stella froze when she spotted Franklin, her eyes widening in shock. She recovered quickly, though, stalking over to his table with a look of fury on her face. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice low but intense. Franklin leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Good evening to you too, Stella. You're looking, well." Stella's eyes narrowed. "Don't play games with me, Franklin. What are you doing in Bora Bora?" Franklin took a sip of his wine, savoring the moment. "Oh, didn't you hear? I own this place now. Well, part of it anyway. Funny how things work out, isn't it?" The color drained from Stella's face. "You, what?" Before Franklin could respond, Anthony appeared at Stella's side. He puffed out his chest, trying to look intimidating despite his bartender's uniform. "Listen, man, you can't just—" Franklin cut him off, his voice sharp as a knife. "Actually, I can. Anthony, consider this your termination notice. Effective immediately." Anthony's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Stella's face contorted with rage. "You can't do this," she sputtered. "We'll fight you." Franklin stood, his voice low but firm. "This is karma for you both. Get lost now, or I'll have security escort you out. As if on cue, 2 large security guards appeared nearby, watching the scene carefully. Stella grabbed Anthony's arm, her nails digging into his skin. "This isn't over, Franklin," she hissed. "You'll regret this." Franklin watched them go, feeling a sense of grim satisfaction. Phase 1 was complete. Now, the real game could begin. As he signaled for the check, Franklin's phone buzzed. It was a text from Susan. How did it go? Franklin allowed himself a small smile as he typed his reply. Perfectly. They never saw it coming. He pocketed his phone and stepped out into the warm night air. The stars twinkled overhead, and the sound of the ocean filled his ears. Franklin took a deep breath, savoring the moment. For 2 years, he'd worked tirelessly towards this goal. He'd rebuilt his life, created a revolutionary product, and positioned himself perfectly for revenge. But this was just the beginning. Stella and Anthony thought they could break him and walk away unscathed. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Franklin Browning was no longer the naive, trusting man they'd betrayed. He was stronger now, harder, and he was just getting started. As he walked back to his suite, Franklin's mind raced with plans. He had them exactly where he wanted them, desperate, angry, and ready to make mistakes. All he had to do now was wait for them to play into his hands. The game was on, and Franklin intended to win, no matter the cost. The week following Franklin's dramatic confrontation with Stella and Anthony was tense. The resort buzzed with whispers and sidelong glances. Franklin could feel the weight of countless eyes on him as he moved through the property, but he refused to show any sign of weakness. Stella and Anthony, for their part, were not content to slink away in defeat. They began a campaign of whispered insinuations and outright lies, targeting both staff and guests. Their goal was clear: undermine Franklin's authority and paint him as unstable and unfit to run the resort. "I heard he had a mental breakdown," Stella confided to a group of wealthy guests by the pool. "That's why he suddenly bought into this place. He's not right in the head." Anthony, meanwhile, focused on the staff. He cornered a young housekeeper in a secluded hallway, his voice low and urgent. "Browning's going to run this place into the ground. He doesn't know the first thing about hospitality. We'll all be out of jobs within a month." The rumors spread like wildfire. Franklin could see the uncertainty in the eyes of the staff, the wary glances from guests. He knew he had to act fast to regain control of the narrative. On Friday morning, Franklin called an all-staff meeting in the resort's largest conference room. As employees filed in, he stood at the front, projecting an aura of calm confidence. Once everyone was seated, he began. "Good morning, everyone. I know there have been some interesting stories circulating this past week," Franklin said, a wry smile playing on his lips. "I thought it was time we addressed them head-on." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "Yes, I'm new to the hospitality industry. Yes, I made my fortune in water filtration technology. And yes, I have a personal history with 2 individuals who were, until recently, employed here." A murmur ran through the crowd. Franklin held up a hand, silencing them. "But I'm not here to air dirty laundry or settle old scores. I'm here because I believe in the potential of this resort, and in each and every one of you." Franklin's voice grew passionate as he outlined his vision for the future. He spoke of sustainability initiatives that would set them apart from competitors. He detailed plans for community involvement, for making the resort not just a retreat for the wealthy, but a vital part of the local economy. "I know change can be scary," Franklin said, his tone softening, "but I'm not here to sweep in and upend everything. I'm here to work with all of you to make this resort the best it can be. My door is always open. If you have concerns, ideas, or just want to chat, don't hesitate to come see me." As the meeting concluded, Franklin could see a shift in the room. The wariness was fading, replaced by cautious optimism. He'd won the first battle, but he knew the war was far from over. Over the next few days, Franklin threw himself into the work of running the resort. He was everywhere, helping in the kitchens, assisting guests, even pitching in with the groundskeeping. The staff watched in amazement as their new boss, the man they'd been told was unstable and incompetent, demonstrated a keen understanding of every aspect of the operation. Franklin also began implementing the eco-friendly practices he'd promised. New, more efficient air conditioning systems were installed. Water-saving devices were fitted in every room. Solar panels began to appear on rooftops. The results were immediate and impressive. Within a month, the resort's utility costs had dropped by 30%. Guests raved about the resort's commitment to sustainability, and bookings began to surge. Arthur McCarty, the resort manager, couldn't hide his amazement. "Mr. Browning," he said one evening, shaking his head in wonder, "I've never seen anything like this. The staff morale is through the roof, guests are happier than ever, and we're saving a fortune on operating costs." "How did you do it?" Franklin allowed himself a small smile. "It's simple, Arthur. I listened to the people who know this place best, you and your staff, and I applied a little ingenuity. That's all." As word of the resort's transformation spread, Franklin received a call from Gilbert Guerrero. "Franklin, my boy," the CEO boomed, "you've outdone yourself. The board is thrilled. We're thinking of implementing your methods across all our properties." Franklin's success was a bitter pill for Stella and Anthony. Their attempts to undermine him had backfired spectacularly, leaving them more desperate than ever. As they sat in their dingy rented apartment, Stella's face was a mask of fury. "This can't be happening," she seethed. "That pathetic loser was supposed to crash and burn, not become some kind of hospitality genius." Anthony paced the small living room, his expression dark. "We need to do something more drastic. Something he can't talk his way out of." Stella's eyes lit up with a malicious gleam. "What about the resort's computer system? If we could mess with the reservations, create some chaos." Anthony nodded slowly, a grin spreading across his face. "I like the way you think, babe. I've got a buddy who's good with computers. Maybe he could help us out." What they didn't know was that Franklin had anticipated just such a move. He'd worked closely with the IT department to set up a sophisticated honeypot trap designed to catch anyone attempting to breach the system. For 3 days, Stella and Anthony worked with their hacker friend, believing they were causing havoc with the resort's bookings. They imagined the chaos that would ensue: double-booked rooms, lost reservations, angry guests. Surely this would be the final nail in Franklin's coffin. On the 4th day, they gathered in their apartment to celebrate their perceived victory. Stella poured cheap champagne into plastic cups, her eyes gleaming with malicious glee. To the downfall of Franklin Browning, she toasted, raising her cup. Anthony clinked his cup against hers. "And to us, baby. We'll be running that place before you know it." Their celebration was cut short by a sharp knock at the door. Anthony frowned, setting down his drink. Who the hell could that be? He opened the door to find 2 burly security guards from the resort, accompanied by a stern-looking police officer. "Stella Browning and Anthony Levine," the officer asked, his voice clipped and professional. Stella appeared behind Anthony, her face pale. "Yes? What's this about?" The officer's expression remained impassive. "You're under arrest for attempted cybercrimes against the Bora Bora Luxury Resort." As the reality of the situation sank in, Stella's composure cracked. She whirled on Anthony, her eyes wild with panic. "You said this would work. You promised we'd get rid of him." Anthony could only shrug helplessly as the officer read them their rights, and the security guards moved in to handcuff them. As they were led away, Stella caught a glimpse of a familiar figure standing in the shadows, Franklin, watching the scene unfold with a look of grim satisfaction. In that moment, she realized the full extent of her mistake. She hadn't just underestimated Franklin. She'd created a formidable enemy out of a man who had once loved her unconditionally. The following week, as the sun began to set over the crystal-clear waters of Bora Bora, Franklin stood on the beach, letting the warm sand sift through his toes. The past 2 years had been a whirlwind of pain, determination, and finally, triumph. Now, as he watched the sky turn a brilliant orange, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. A familiar voice broke into his reverie. "Penny for your thoughts?" Franklin turned to see Susan Chan walking towards him, a warm smile on her face. He'd invited her to Bora Bora to celebrate his success, and her presence felt like the final piece of a complex puzzle falling into place. "I was just thinking about how everything turned out," Franklin said, returning her smile. It's hard to believe, isn't it? Susan nodded, her expression thoughtful. It really is. Are you okay, Franklin? I mean, with everything that's happened. Franklin took a deep breath, considering her question. For the first time in years, he felt truly at peace. You know what? I really am. I lost something I thought was important, but I gained so much more. My work is making a difference, and I've learned what real loyalty looks like. He turned to Susan, his eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you for sticking by me through all of this. I couldn't have done it without you. Susan's smile widened. That's what friends are for, Franklin. So, what's next for Franklin Browning, resort owner and environmental revolutionary? Franklin chuckled, his mind already racing with possibilities. I'm thinking expansion. There's a whole world out there that could use our help. And this time, I'm not letting anyone hold me back. As they walked along the beach, the resort gleaming behind them, Franklin felt a sense of closure. He'd not just survived betrayal, he'd thrived in spite of it. The future, for once, looked brighter than ever. They paused, watching as the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon. Franklin turned to Susan, suddenly aware of how right it felt to have her by his side. You know, Susan, he said, his voice soft but confident, I've been thinking. We've been such a great team, both professionally and personally. Would you like to grab dinner sometime? Not as colleagues, but maybe something more. Susan's eyes lit up, a blend of surprise and joy dancing across her features. I thought you'd never ask, Franklin. I'd love to. As they continued their walk, hand in hand, Franklin marveled at the twists and turns his life had taken. He'd lost a wife, but gained a true partner. He'd been betrayed, but found the strength to rise above it. His work was changing the world, and he'd found someone who truly appreciated and supported his vision. Franklin realized that sometimes, losing what you thought you wanted could lead you to what you truly needed. With Susan by his side and his innovative ideas changing the world, he'd finally found his true path to happiness and success. As they strolled back towards the resort, the first stars twinkling overhead, Franklin felt a surge of excitement for the future. He'd weathered the storm, emerged stronger, and now the world was full of possibilities. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he was ready to face them, not alone, but with someone who truly understood and valued him. The betrayal that had once threatened to destroy him had instead been the catalyst for his greatest triumphs. Franklin Browning had not just survived, he had conquered. And the best was yet to come.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.